It was supposed to be another routine gathering at the annual Global Tech Innovators Conference. Silicon Valley's finest minds were in the room. Engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs, all there to showcase the next big thing. The energy was electric, filled with excited chatter about breakthroughs, inventions, and futuristic ideas. No one expected what was about to happen. Elon Musk, the billionaire mind behind SpaceX, Tesla, and a dozen other groundbreaking ventures, was the star of the day. As the keynote speaker, he stood confidently at the podium, speaking passionately about his vision for the future of humanity. The crowd hung on his every word, applauding his vision of a multi-planetary civilization. But just as he was about to dive into the next section of his speech, one filled with exciting details about the new advancements in space exploration, something unexpected happened. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? A soft voice cut through the air, clear and unassuming but powerful enough to stop everyone in their tracks. Mr. Musk, do you believe in God? The room fell silent. For a moment, no one moved. The question echoed through the hall, catching everyone off guard, and all eyes turned to the source of the voice. On the front row, a tiny figure sat, her legs swinging freely, barely touching the ground. She was no more than 5 years old, wearing a bright yellow dress with colorful patterns, her wide, curious eyes locked on Elon. Her name was Emma, and she had been quietly listening to the keynote, her mind racing with 1,000 questions of her own. But that one question, simple yet profound, had been growing in her mind for days. It just slipped out, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Elon stood frozen for a moment. He had expected tough questions about technology, Mars, electric cars, and artificial intelligence. But never this. Never a question that cut straight to the heart of existence. His gaze met Emma's, and for the first time in years, the confident, composed Elon Musk felt a twinge of discomfort. The eyes of the room were now on him. He could hear murmurs, whispers spreading through the crowd. "Did she just ask him that?" someone muttered. "Is that even appropriate?" Emma's question hung in the air like an uninvited guest, one that refused to be ignored. Elon cleared his throat, shifting his stance, his mind racing. He had faced critics, skeptics, and journalists eager to dissect his every move. But this was different. This was a question about something far deeper than any technological achievement or business venture. This was about faith, something that had always eluded him. For a moment, he considered ignoring the question, redirecting the conversation back to the latest advancements in space exploration. But the sincerity in Emma's eyes made that impossible. She wasn't asking about rockets or electric cars. She was asking about something far more personal. Elon took a deep breath and finally spoke, his voice a little shaky, more so than he would have liked. I don't really know, to be honest," he said, looking down at the ground, then back at the room. "I've always been more focused on what we can prove through science, through the things we can see and touch. But I think I've always wondered about that myself." Emma nodded thoughtfully, her little face a picture of concentration. "So, you're still figuring it out?" Elon chuckled, his nervousness starting to fade. "Yeah, I guess I am." The room remained quiet, but now, instead of tension, there was a strange sense of curiosity that filled the air. Some of the audience shifted in their seats, others exchanged looks, unsure of how to react. It was rare to see a man like Elon Musk, the visionary who could land rockets and plan for Mars, so vulnerable in front of a room full of the world's most powerful minds. But it wasn't just the vulnerability that stood out. It was the realization that this was the first time in years, maybe even ever, that Musk had really thought about the question. That, in a room full of inventions, formulas, and technological marvels, Emma had asked the one question that couldn't be answered with algorithms or equations. Elon glanced over at her, his eyes softening. "I think that's something we all have to figure out in our own time, don't you?" Emma smiled, her small hands clasped together. "I think so," she said simply, "but I believe everyone can find the answer inside." The moment felt like an eternity, but it lasted only a few seconds before the room slowly came back to life. The tension faded, and the whispers died down. Emma's innocent question had pierced the surface of a much deeper conversation, one that had never been part of the conference agenda. Elon nodded, then, with a small smile, turned back to the podium, as if the brief exchange had never happened. "All right, where was I? Oh yes, Mars." He resumed his talk, but something had changed. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just in him. The audience, too, seemed a little quieter, a little more reflective. As the day went on, the question lingered in Elon's mind, echoing with each passing thought. It was strange how something so simple, from a child no less, had made him reconsider everything. He had spent so much of his life focused on building the future, on conquering space, on changing the world. But today, for the first time in a long while, he found himself wondering if there was something more important than all of that, something more profound. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a part of him knew that this question, simple as it seemed, had set something in motion, a journey he wasn't sure he was ready for, but knew he had to take. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emma Parker wasn't like most kids her age. While most children were learning to spell their names and count to 10, Emma had already solved equations that would leave even seasoned mathematicians scratching their heads. By the time she turned 5, she could calculate the trajectory of a rocket launch, explain the basics of quantum mechanics, and name all the moons of Jupiter. But despite her extraordinary intellect, Emma wasn't a show-off. In fact, she rarely boasted about her abilities. She was a quiet child, with an inquisitive nature and an endless desire to understand the world around her. Her story wasn't a typical one. Emma was born in a small town just outside of Boston, a place where kids spent their afternoons playing outside or watching cartoons. But Emma never seemed to fit in with the other children. She was drawn to books, to puzzles, to anything that could stretch her mind. At the age of 3, she was already reading books that most adults would find difficult to follow. Her teachers were often baffled by her advanced abilities, but it wasn't her academic achievements that made her stand out. It was her curious, thoughtful nature. Her grandmother, Maggie, was her closest companion and the person who understood her best. Emma's parents had died in a car accident when she was just a baby, leaving Maggie to raise her. While many children her age were nurtured by their parents, Emma had been brought up by a woman who, though wise, was deeply rooted in tradition and spirituality. Maggie had always been a woman of faith, believing firmly in God and the power of prayer. But Emma's mind wasn't one that could be satisfied by simple faith alone. She wanted to know why the stars twinkled at night, why the birds could fly, why people prayed. Her questions were endless, and Maggie did her best to answer them, though sometimes Emma's inquiries left her stumped. "Grandma," Emma had asked one day, after reading a book on space travel, "where does space end? And if it ends, what's on the other side?" Maggie, who wasn't an expert in science, could only offer her best guess. "I suppose space doesn't really have an end, sweetheart. It just keeps going, just like the love we have for each other. It's infinite." Emma had pondered this for a moment, then asked, "But how do you know? Maybe there's something beyond it. Maybe there's a place where everything is different." Maggie smiled, patting Emma's hand gently. "You've got a mind like no other, little one. But sometimes, you don't need to know the answers to everything. Some things, you just have to believe." Despite Maggie's attempts to offer her a sense of peace through belief, Emma wasn't content with the unknown. She needed to understand it, to break it apart and put it back together. But, as Emma grew older, it became increasingly clear that her curiosity wasn't just intellectual. It was spiritual, too. Emma began to ask questions that went beyond science, questions that made even the most patient adults uncomfortable, questions about life, death, and the mysteries of the universe. One day, when Emma was 4, she turned to Maggie and asked, "Grandma, do you think there's a God who made everything? Or do you think the universe just happened by accident?" Maggie had been caught off guard, unsure how to respond. As a woman of faith, she believed wholeheartedly in God's creation. But how could she explain that belief to Emma, a child whose mind seemed to constantly question the boundaries of what was known and unknown? "Well," Maggie said slowly, I believe in God because He's always been there for me. I can feel Him in my heart, in the beauty of the world around us." Emma looked thoughtful, her big brown eyes squinting as if she were piecing together a puzzle. "But how do you know He's real? Have you ever seen Him?" Maggie had smiled softly, stroking Emma's hair. "No, sweetheart, I haven't seen Him, but I know He's real because of the love I feel. The love I have for you, for your parents, for the world." Emma didn't respond, but she didn't need to. She had learned to respect Maggie's views, even if they didn't answer her questions. But deep down, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the universe than what anyone had ever told her. And that's what led her to the question she'd asked Elon Musk at the Global Tech Innovators Conference. On the day of the conference, when Emma asked her now famous question, it wasn't a random thought that had popped into her head. It was the result of months of deep, sometimes overwhelming, contemplation. She had learned about God from her grandmother, but the more she learned about science, the more she felt the two didn't fit together neatly. She could calculate the speed of light, explain how the Earth orbits the sun, and even tell you how rockets were designed to break through Earth's atmosphere, but none of that seemed to answer the bigger question. Why were we here? Was there a purpose to it all, or was life just an accident of chance? And that was the question she'd asked Elon Musk. "Mr. Musk, do you believe in God?" It had been simple, almost childishly direct, but it came from a place of deep thought. To Emma, the question wasn't about religion or spirituality in the traditional sense. It was about the meaning behind everything, the purpose of human life, the stars, the rockets, and the technology that was rapidly changing the world. In her young mind, it all seemed connected. And maybe, just maybe, Elon Musk, someone who built things that reach beyond Earth, would know the answer. But as she sat in the conference room and saw Elon's startled expression, she realized that maybe even the smartest people didn't have all the answers. And that made her wonder if anyone ever would. Emma didn't know it then, but her simple question had triggered something in Elon Musk, a spark that would set off a journey of discovery, both for him and for her. Little did they know, their paths were about to intertwine in a way neither could have predicted. A genius child, a billionaire tech mogul, and a question that would open doors to the mysteries of life, science, and faith. In the days that followed the conference, Elon couldn't shake the question Emma had asked him. It lingered in his mind, slipping into his thoughts during meetings, in the middle of strategy sessions, even as he was designing the next generation of rockets. "Do you believe in God?" The question seemed deceptively simple, yet it had forced him to confront something he'd been avoiding for years. Elon prided himself on being a rational thinker, a man who trusted only what could be measured, quantified, and tested. The idea of faith, of belief in something intangible, had never really fit into his worldview. His work in technology, his ambitions with SpaceX, and his vision for a future on Mars were all based on hard science, on finding solutions to problems that could be solved with logic and innovation. The universe, as far as he was concerned, was a series of systems, each with its own set of rules. But Emma's question, simple as it was, poked at the edges of his mind, stirring feelings he hadn't expected. His initial response had been shaky, but it was sincere. He didn't know whether or not he believed in God. He had never really thought about it that way. Science had always been his compass, guiding him toward a future based on what was observable and tangible. But Emma's innocent inquiry had triggered a deeper curiosity within him, a curiosity about things that couldn't be measured or explained. He had spent the past few days grappling with this new conflict, the conflict between his understanding of the world as a scientist and the deeper, more philosophical questions Emma had unwittingly opened up. It was a tension he wasn't sure how to resolve. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was different. This wasn't about rockets or AI. This was about existence itself. Meanwhile, Emma was no stranger to tension. Her mind had been racing ever since the conference, too. She hadn't been expecting the kind of response she'd gotten from Elon. His hesitation, his openness, had surprised her. She had assumed someone as brilliant as him would have a clear answer, a definitive stance on such a question. But it seemed that, even in the world of science and technology, there were mysteries that defied logic. That night, after the conference, as she sat on her grandmother's porch, Emma's mind was still swirling. Maggie was inside, preparing dinner, and Emma had found solace in the cool evening air. She could hear the crickets chirping, the distant hum of traffic, but her thoughts were far away. "Grandma," she called softly, her voice breaking the stillness of the evening. Maggie stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was used to Emma's big questions, so she sat down beside her granddaughter without hesitation. "What's on your mind, honey? Do you think Elon Musk believes in God?" Emma asked, her voice quiet but filled with the same intensity she had shown during the conference. Maggie raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. She had heard about Emma's conversation with Elon, but she hadn't realized the weight it had left on her. "Well, sweetheart, I'm not sure," she said gently, "but I think his heart is still searching, just like yours." Emma nodded, chewing on her lower lip. "But he's so smart, Grandma. He makes rockets and cars, and he's going to take us to Mars. Why doesn't he know?" Maggie smiled softly, the wisdom of her years showing in her expression. "Sometimes, even the smartest people don't have all the answers, darling. There's no shame in that. We all have questions we can't answer. But that doesn't mean the answers aren't out there." "But what if there is no answer?" Emma asked, her voice a little more fragile than usual. She had never considered that before. Maggie's eyes softened, and she took Emma's hand in hers. "Sometimes, the journey to find the answer is just as important as the answer itself. Life isn't about getting all the facts right. It's about the questions you ask and the people you ask them to. Keep asking, Emma. Keep searching. And don't be afraid of the unknown. It's where the magic happens." Emma was silent for a moment, absorbing her grandmother's words. She didn't fully understand them yet, but there was something comforting about the way Maggie spoke. It made her feel like she wasn't alone in her search, that there was a place for her curiosity, even if it couldn't always be satisfied. Meanwhile, across the country, Elon was dealing with his own internal conflict. After the conference, he had spent hours researching various philosophies and perspectives on God. He had always been dismissive of religion, thinking of it as a relic of the past. But now, he found himself reading about different belief systems: Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, even atheism, trying to find some clarity. Nothing quite fit. Some of the arguments made sense, others didn't. The more he read, the more questions he had. How could he reconcile his deep love for exploration and discovery with the idea of a creator he couldn't see or measure? And if the universe was truly the product of random chance, what did that mean for humanity's purpose? He even found himself in a moment of unexpected vulnerability. He thought back to his own upbringing. His mother, May, had been a woman of faith, though not in the conventional sense. She had always been spiritual, but never pushed religion onto her children. She had believed that every person had to find their own path. As Elon thought about it, he realized that he had never really questioned that idea. He had always assumed that faith was something personal, something that didn't need to be shared or understood by others. But now, as he stared at his phone, considering whether to reach out to someone, anyone, for guidance, Elon realized that the conflict he was feeling wasn't just internal. It was the beginning of a much larger journey. A journey that would require him to confront not only his views on science and faith, but the meaning of his life's work. It was strange. He had dedicated so much of his life to pushing humanity forward, to building a future on Mars. But now, standing on the precipice of something much bigger, Elon wasn't sure where the next step should lead. In the days following the conference, Elon found himself caught in an unexpected emotional whirlwind. What had started as a simple question from a 5-year-old girl had transformed into an intellectual and spiritual dilemma that he couldn't escape. It wasn't like him to let anything, linger in his mind for so long without finding an answer. But this time, the answers weren't easy to come by. They didn't come from books or formulas or complex algorithms. They were something deeper, more intangible, something outside the realm of physics and engineering. Elon's nightly reading sessions had taken him down winding paths. He had read about the great philosophers, Descartes, Nietzsche, Kant, whose ideas explored the nature of existence, the divine, and the human condition. Some ideas resonated with him, others left him more confused. The more he read, the more he realized how much of the universe's mysteries had yet to be explored. Perhaps it wasn't just about science. After all, maybe there were other ways of knowing. But the strangest thing was this. The more he delved into the unknowns of spirituality, the more he found himself thinking of Emma. The innocence in her question, her unrelenting curiosity. It was as if she had tapped into something Elon couldn't reach. He had spent his entire life focused on discovering the secrets of the physical world, the rules that governed the stars and planets. Yet, here was this child, asking him to ponder a question that seemed entirely beyond the grasp of science. Do you believe in God? Every time he asked himself that question, a wave of discomfort washed over him. Not because he was afraid of the answer, but because it made him realize how little he actually knew about faith, about belief, about the intangible forces that shaped the world. How could he, a man who had literally sent rockets into space, stand in front of a child and admit he didn't know something as fundamental as that? Meanwhile, Emma had been thinking about the conversation with Elon, too. It wasn't just curiosity that had driven her to ask the question in the first place. It was a sense of longing. She had always felt there was something more to the world than what she could see or understand. Her fascination with science had shown her the intricate details of how things worked, the way atoms interacted, how gravity held everything together, how rockets could break free of Earth's atmosphere. But it wasn't enough. It didn't explain why the universe existed in the first place. Why were we here? Why was everything the way it was? Her grandmother's spiritual beliefs had comforted her, but they hadn't satisfied her curiosity. She loved Maggie dearly, but she could tell that Maggie's faith was grounded in something beyond reason, something Emma couldn't quite grasp. Emma was not just a brilliant little girl. She was a seeker, and seekers need answers. But where to look? That was when Emma started looking deeper into her books, beyond the pages of scientific texts. She found herself reading stories of different cultures, religious texts, philosophical writings, anything that might give her a clue about the bigger picture. She even started talking to her friends at school about it. While their answers were often more focused on fairy tales or cartoons, Emma knew that she had to keep searching. The more she thought about the question she had asked Elon, the more she realized that even someone as smart as him might not have all the answers. And that was strange to her. It made her feel less alone in her own uncertainty. It wasn't that she wanted Elon to have the answer, but rather that she wanted him to be as curious as she was, open to asking questions, to exploring the unknown. In a way, she admired him. His work with SpaceX, his passion for making humanity a multi-planetary species, it was all so awe-inspiring. But something told her that Elon, in all his brilliance, was missing something that was just as important as rockets and artificial intelligence. He was missing the big questions that couldn't be solved in a lab or by launching a spacecraft. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma sat quietly on the porch of her grandmother's house, gazing up at the stars. She liked looking at the stars, even though she knew a lot about them, about their light years and their origins, about how they were born in nebulae and how some of them would eventually die in supernovae. She loved it all, but she couldn't help feeling a tug in her chest, a sense that the stars weren't just something to be studied, they were something to be wondered at. And there, in that stillness, she made a decision. She would keep asking. She would keep searching. And maybe, just maybe, one day, she would find someone who could answer her questions. The following week, Elon received an unexpected message. It was from his assistant, who informed him that Emma Parker had requested a meeting with him. Elon's first reaction was disbelief. Why would a 5-year-old want to meet with him? He could understand a student wanting to ask questions about space travel, but this seemed different. This felt personal. But Emma's message was clear. She wanted to talk to him about her question. She wasn't content with the answer he'd given her at the conference. She wanted a deeper conversation. Elon's initial reaction was to ignore it. He had far more pressing matters to attend to: meetings, planning sessions, design work. But the more he thought about it, the more the idea intrigued him. He couldn't get the question out of his head. What if this was the opportunity he needed to explore his own uncertainty? And so, despite the practical objections that popped into his mind, Elon agreed to meet with her. He found it odd, yet oddly fitting, that the person who had asked him the most challenging question of his life was a little girl, a 5-year-old whose curiosity could not be contained by the usual boundaries of science and technology. When the meeting was arranged, Emma and her grandmother were flown to California. Elon met them at a quiet, private space within the SpaceX facility, a place where discussions could unfold without distractions. As Elon prepared for the meeting, a strange nervousness crept over him. What would a conversation with a child about faith and the universe be like? Would he be able to explain his thoughts clearly? Could he share his uncertainties without looking like a fool? He hadn't been nervous about a conversation in years, but this was different. This was uncharted territory. The morning of the meeting, the air around SpaceX was calm, almost serene. Elon Musk, ever the meticulous planner, had scheduled this discussion during a lull in his otherwise chaotic day. He was used to high-stakes meetings, pitch sessions with investors, brainstorming with engineers, and interviews with the media. But nothing about this day felt normal. He was about to meet a child, a 5-year-old girl, to discuss something that had plagued his mind for days, the question of God. It seemed almost absurd that he, a man who had transformed space travel and spearheaded ventures to colonize Mars, was about to engage in a conversation that felt more personal and more profound than any of his professional endeavors. As he waited in the quiet meeting room, Elon felt a strange mix of curiosity and apprehension. He glanced at his watch. Emma and her grandmother, Maggie, were scheduled to arrive in 15 minutes. Elon's assistant had briefed him on the details, and he was well aware of Emma's intellectual brilliance. But it was not her intellect that made him nervous. It was the sheer weight of her question. Do you believe in God? It was a question that had disrupted his routine, forced him to challenge the very foundations of his belief system, or lack thereof. He had spent so many years looking to the stars for answers, believing that space, the vast, endless unknown, was where humanity's future lay. And now, standing on the brink of exploring the unknowns of the universe, a 5-year-old had asked him to look inward, to ask questions that even science could not answer. Maggie and Emma arrived promptly. Maggie was exactly what Elon had expected. Wise, composed, with an aura of quiet strength. Emma, on the other hand, was a striking contrast. She looked every bit like the child she was, with bright eyes and an inquisitive expression. But there was an intensity about her, an energy that suggested she was not just here to ask questions, but to explore the deeper, unspoken layers of reality. "Mr. Musk," Maggie greeted him, offering a warm smile as she shook his hand. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us." "Elon, please," he replied, shaking her hand firmly. "I'm glad you came. Please, make yourselves comfortable." Emma took a seat across from him, her little legs dangling from the chair as she sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap. She gazed at Elon, her eyes full of curiosity. There was something unsettlingly mature about her gaze, like she could see right through the world's conventions and straight into its deepest truths. Elon felt a sudden rush of admiration for her and a simultaneous unease. He wasn't sure if he was the one supposed to lead this conversation, or if, perhaps, he was about to learn something important from her. "I wanted to talk to you about something, Mr. Musk," Emma said in a soft, yet purposeful voice. Her tone was gentle, but carried an unshakable determination. "You said that you didn't know if you believed in God." She paused, watching him carefully. "I want to know more about that." Elon cleared his throat, feeling an unexpected weight in his chest. "Well, Emma, I suppose I've never really thought about it that much. I've always focused on things that can be measured and proven, things like rockets and the technology that will take us to Mars. But your question, it made me stop and think. I guess I don't really have an answer yet." Emma nodded, as if she understood. "But you think there's an answer, right? Even if it's hard to find?" Elon couldn't help but smile at her directness. "I think there must be an answer, but it's complicated. Science gives us answers about how things work, but it doesn't really answer why we're here in the first place. And when you ask about God, well, that's not something science can really measure." Emma tilted her head, considering his words carefully. "But you still keep asking, don't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think that's what makes you different. You ask why because you want to understand, even if there's no easy answer." Elon was taken aback. Her words struck him more than he expected. "I suppose I do," he said slowly. "I ask a lot of questions, But sometimes, the answers I find just open up more questions. Emma's eyes sparkled as she leaned forward slightly. I think that's the point, don't you? The questions don't have to have answers. The search is what's important. You're looking, Mr. Musk, and that's what matters. Elon felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't because of what Emma was saying. It was the raw truth in her words, a truth that he had been avoiding for a long time. He was used to solving problems, tackling challenges with logic and precision. But Emma was showing him that perhaps the greatest challenge wasn't something that could be solved. Perhaps it was something that had to be lived. Do you believe in God, Emma? Elon asked, his voice surprisingly tender. It was a question he had meant to ask earlier, but hadn't found the courage to ask. The little girl in front of him was, in many ways, more connected to the mystery of life than he was. Emma thought for a moment, her small brow furrowed in concentration. I don't know if I believe in God, but I believe that there's something bigger than us. Something that's holding everything together, like gravity or the stars. I think it's a part of everything in the universe. Elon was silent for a moment. Her answer wasn't a typical response from a child. It was thoughtful, insightful, and carried a weight of meaning that Elon hadn't expected. In a way, Emma had given him the answer he was seeking, though she hadn't meant to. It wasn't a clear-cut, black-and-white answer to the question of God, but rather a reminder that there was a grander order to things, something beyond the visible and the measurable, something beyond rockets, algorithms, and data points. That's a really good way to look at it, Elon said, feeling a sense of humility he wasn't used to. Maybe there's something to that. Emma smiled, her eyes lighting up. Maybe we'll both figure it out someday. I think that's the fun part, the searching. Maggie, who had been quietly observing the conversation, smiled warmly at the exchange. She had always known that Emma's curiosity would take her to places beyond what even the wisest adults could offer. And now, as she watched Elon Musk, the man who was leading humanity into the stars, wrestle with a question of faith, Maggie felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Her granddaughter, at the age of 5, had opened a door for someone who had spent a lifetime building paths to the stars. Elon's mind was racing. The conversation had gone in directions he hadn't anticipated, and yet, it felt like a breakthrough. Not in terms of scientific discovery or technological advancement, but in terms of something far more profound. Perhaps the pursuit of knowledge was not just about solving problems or reaching new frontiers. It was also about learning to ask the right questions, to accept the mystery of things beyond our understanding, and to keep searching for answers, even when they don't come easily. He looked at Emma, the bright-eyed little girl who had somehow unraveled one of the most complex and elusive parts of his existence, and smiled. You're right, Emma. The search is the important part. After the meeting with Emma, Elon couldn't shake the sense that something fundamental had shifted within him. He had expected to meet with a child who was fascinated by science, someone who might ask him questions about rockets or artificial intelligence, but instead, he had encountered a 5-year-old who had asked him one of the most profound questions of his life. Do you believe in God? The simplicity of the question, and the sincerity with which Emma had asked it, had left him feeling unsettled in the best possible way. It wasn't just the question itself. It was the way she framed it, the way she made him realize that the search for meaning, for understanding, wasn't always about finding a concrete answer. It was about asking the question and being open to the unknown. For days after their conversation, Elon found himself thinking deeply about his own beliefs, or lack thereof. He had always been the kind of person who trusted what he could see and measure. His whole career had been based on this philosophy. If you could break something down into its smallest components, you could understand it and control it. The stars, space travel, artificial intelligence. He could wrap his mind around these things because they followed laws, rules, formulas. But faith? Belief in something greater than yourself? That wasn't something that could be quantified, and for the first time, he realized how much that uncertainty had bothered him. In his spare time, Elon continued to read more books on philosophy, on religion, on cosmology. He had always been fascinated by the origins of the universe, but now he approached these subjects with a new perspective. He found himself reading about the great thinkers of history, from Socrates and Plato to more modern philosophers who explored the role of belief and spirituality in human existence. But the more he read, the more he felt like he was just skimming the surface. It wasn't that he was looking for a quick fix or a single, definitive answer. It was that he was starting to understand that some things were simply beyond the grasp of logic and reason. Some things were meant to be felt, not understood. Meanwhile, Emma had returned to her everyday life with a sense of quiet fulfillment. After the meeting with Elon, she felt lighter, more certain of her own beliefs. Even though she wasn't exactly sure what those beliefs were. She wasn't looking for answers as much as she was looking for a sense of peace. And in talking to Elon, she had found that peace, even if it came in the form of uncertainty. Emma knew that she didn't have all the answers either, but she had learned something important. The world wasn't just about what you could see and touch. It wasn't about rocket ships or car engines or the things people made. It was about the mysteries that lay just beyond reach. The things you could only feel in your heart or perhaps in the spaces between stars. As she sat on the porch with her grandmother, watching the night sky, she felt a strange sense of connection to the universe. The stars, so far away and unreachable, suddenly felt closer. They weren't just lights in the sky anymore. They were part of something bigger. Maybe that's what her question had been about all along. Finding a connection, a sense of belonging in the vast, unknowable expanse. Maggie, as usual, was quietly observant, letting Emma process the things she had learned. "You seem quieter than usual, dear," she said one evening, noticing the change in her granddaughter. "Are you okay?" Emma smiled softly, her eyes sparkling with a new kind of understanding. "I think I understand a little more now, Grandma. It's not about the answer. It's about the search. And I'm okay with that." Maggie smiled, proud of how much Emma had grown in such a short time. "That's a very wise way to look at it, sweetheart." A few weeks passed, and Elon found himself at another crossroads. His work at SpaceX was progressing. Plans for Mars colonization were moving forward, and he had just signed a deal with the U.S. government to develop the next generation of sustainable rockets. But in the quiet moments, when he wasn't focused on the future of humanity or on launching the next ambitious project, he found himself reflecting on something more personal. He had always considered himself a man driven by reason, by logic, by the tangible. But now, more than ever, he realized that even the most rational, forward-thinking mind needed to ask the hard questions. The big questions. The ones that didn't have easy answers. He found himself thinking back to the conversation with Emma. Her words, about the search, about not needing the answers but needing to ask the right questions, echoed in his mind. He had lived his life looking outward, aiming for the stars. But in doing so, he had neglected the inward journey. What did it mean to be human? What did it mean to exist in a world where so much was still unknown? It wasn't that he was suddenly a believer in God. Far from it. But the question was there, sitting quietly in his heart, nudging him to explore it further. And for the first time in his life, Elon Musk was okay with that. One evening, as he sat alone in his office overlooking the SpaceX campus, Elon decided to do something he had never done before. He picked up his phone and dialed Maggie Parker's number. He knew she had been Emma's guide on this journey, and in some ways, she had guided him too. When Maggie picked up, Elon hesitated for a moment. He hadn't expected to call her, but something about the conversation with Emma had made him realize that he wasn't the only one searching. "Maggie," he said, his voice steady but with a note of uncertainty. "I've been thinking a lot about what Emma asked me, and I think I'd like to talk more about it. About God, about life, the search for meaning." Maggie's voice was warm, kind, as always. "Of course, Elon. I think it's good to ask questions. It's how we grow." "Yeah," Elon replied, feeling something shift inside him. "It's how we grow." The days following Elon's conversation with Maggie left him feeling more unsettled, and yet more at peace, than he had in years. He had always prided himself on being a man of science, a problem solver who worked tirelessly to improve the world through technology. But now, he felt the weight of an unanswered question pressing heavily on his heart, one he had previously avoided. What if the answers weren't all found in rockets and algorithms? That evening, as he sat in the vast quiet of his private office, Elon pulled up the notes from his meeting with Emma. He had made it a habit to jot down anything that lingered after significant moments, and the words Emma had spoken seemed to resonate deeply within him. It's not about the answer. It's about the search. It was such a simple statement, but it held a truth that he hadn't been ready to face until now. He stared at the stars visible through the massive glass windows of his office. Out there, in the dark expanse of space, he had placed all his faith in human ingenuity, believing that we could conquer the unknown, that we could answer every question if we tried hard enough. But what Emma had given him was a glimpse of a different truth, that some questions weren't meant to be answered. They were meant to be lived, to be felt, to be pondered in the quiet moments when all the noise of the world had quieted. Elon took a deep breath and began to read through the notes he had taken during his latest philosophical explorations. He had revisited some of the most influential thinkers throughout history: Aristotle, Einstein, Carl Sagan, seeking out their thoughts on the nature of existence and the cosmos. He was looking for something, anything that could give him clarity, but all he found were more questions. The paradox was maddening. The more he searched, the less he felt he understood. There was a beauty to that uncertainty, but it was also deeply uncomfortable. Could it really be that the brightest minds throughout history had spent their entire lives grappling with these questions, only to realize that answers were elusive at best? Was it possible that the true answer to the greatest mysteries of existence lay in simply acknowledging that some things were beyond us? Meanwhile, Emma had found herself on a journey of her own. After their meeting, she had gone back to her studies with an added sense of purpose. Her parents had always encouraged her intellectual curiosity, and now she was diving even deeper into the mysteries of the universe. But there was something new in her heart, something she couldn't quite describe. It wasn't about science. It wasn't about formulas or facts. It was about something bigger, something intangible. It wasn't that she had all the answers, far from it. But Emma had discovered something valuable that many adults never learn: the art of wonder. She had spent countless hours reading about black holes, distant galaxies, and the origins of the universe, but she now realized that there was a different kind of knowledge, a different way of understanding the world that wasn't based on facts or equations. It was the knowledge of the heart, the kind of knowledge that could be found by asking why without the need for an immediate answer. One night, as Emma sat on the balcony of her grandmother's house looking up at the stars, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The same stars she had studied for years no longer seemed like distant points of light. They seemed closer, like they were part of a greater, unspoken connection, as if the very act of gazing at them had somehow bridged the gap between her and the universe. She thought of Elon, and of the way he had spoken of his doubts, of his struggle to reconcile science with something bigger than himself. She knew that he, too, was searching. The difference between them, perhaps, was that Emma wasn't afraid of the search itself. She didn't need the answers. She simply needed the journey. Elon's quest for understanding continued, but now it had a different energy. His meeting with Emma had cracked open something in him that had remained closed for years. He began to seek out more conversations, whether with philosophers, scientists, or spiritual leaders, anyone who might help him make sense of the spiritual dimensions of existence. And yet, despite all the books he read, all the discussions he had, he still couldn't help but feel that he was searching for something beyond the human capacity to explain. One afternoon, Elon found himself walking through the halls of the SpaceX headquarters, deep in thought, when he bumped into one of his longtime colleagues, Dr. Lena Brooks. She was a brilliant astrophysicist and someone Elon had long respected for her insights into the universe's most perplexing questions. "You seem preoccupied, Elon," Lena remarked, raising an eyebrow. "Didn't expect to see you here on a Friday afternoon." Elon paused, feeling a brief sense of vulnerability. He had never been one to share personal struggles with others, especially not his team. But there was something about Lena, her sharp intellect and open-minded nature, that made him feel like this might be a conversation worth having. "I've been thinking about something big," Elon admitted. "I met a little girl recently, 5 years old. She asked me a question about God, and it's been on my mind ever since." Lena looked at him with curiosity, clearly intrigued. "A 5-year-old asked you about God? And it's bothering you?" "It's not the question that bothers me," Elon said. leaning against the wall and running a hand through his hair. It's that. I don't know how to answer it. I mean, I've spent my entire life looking at the stars, trying to find answers to questions about the universe. But when it comes to something like this, it feels impossible. Lena nodded thoughtfully, her expression one of understanding. You know, Elon, the question of God has been with humanity since the dawn of time. It's something people have wrestled with for centuries, scientists and theologians alike. And the truth is, there's no answer that will satisfy everyone. But I think that's okay. What do you mean? Lena smiled, a little wistfully. I think it's okay not to have the answer. Sometimes the questions are more important than the answers themselves. The fact that you're asking, that you're willing to wrestle with it, that's what matters. The search for meaning, for purpose, is what gives life depth. If we had all the answers, life would be, well, boring. Elon stared at her, absorbing her words. For the first time in a while, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't a sudden revelation or epiphany, but rather a quiet, subtle understanding. Maybe it's okay not to have all the answers, he thought. Maybe it's okay to search without expecting closure. Later that evening, after his conversation with Lena, Elon sat back at his desk and looked out over the horizon. The city lights of Los Angeles twinkled below, but his mind was far away, lost in the stars. There was still so much he didn't know. So much about the universe, about humanity, and about the mysteries that lay beyond reason. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of calm in that uncertainty. The search wasn't just about finding answers. It was about asking the right questions, opening yourself up to the possibility that not everything could be explained. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most profound realization of all. Elon picked up the phone and dialed Maggie Parker's number once more. This time, he wasn't just looking for an answer. He was looking for someone to share the journey with. Weeks passed, and the summer heat began to soften, as if nature itself were preparing for a change. Elon was still deep in thought, his mind constantly cycling between his work, the vastness of space, and the philosophical questions that had crept into his life. But now, there was a quiet calm inside him, an understanding that the search itself was as valuable as the destination. He was at his office late one evening, poring over designs for SpaceX's latest rocket, when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Maggie. Elon, I've been thinking about our conversations. I think I know someone who could help you with the spiritual side of this search you're on. I've been in touch with a man who's a theologian and a philosopher. His name is Father Michael. He's someone who can look at these questions from a perspective you might not have considered. He's not one for easy answers, but he'll make you think in ways that might challenge your current understanding. Would you be open to meeting him? Let me know what you think. Elon paused for a moment, staring at the message. He had been hoping to continue his search for meaning, but he hadn't expected to find someone who might help him reconcile his scientific worldview with the more spiritual questions he was grappling with. He didn't know much about theologians or philosophers of religion, but Maggie had been a steady source of guidance, and he trusted her judgment. He replied with a simple, "Yes, I'd like to meet him." A week later, Elon found himself driving to a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The street was lined with modest homes, and there was a peaceful, almost timeless quality to the area. Elon parked his car and walked to the door of a small, unassuming building. The sign outside read, St. Thomas Aquinas Parish. He had been told that Father Michael was a priest here, but Maggie hadn't mentioned how deeply involved he was in the community. Elon had expected a more academic setting, perhaps a lecture hall or a private study, but instead, he was about to meet someone whose life seemed intimately tied to the people and the place around him. When he entered, he was greeted by a warm, almost maternal atmosphere. The air smelled faintly of incense, and soft light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the stone floor. The space was both humbling and calming, and for a moment, Elon felt a strange sense of peace he hadn't expected. Father Michael was standing near the altar when Elon entered. He was a man in his late 50s, with graying hair and a kind face that seemed to carry both wisdom and warmth. His eyes were sharp, but not in a way that felt cold. More like someone who had spent decades thinking deeply about the world and the human experience. "Mr. Musk," Father Michael said with a smile, offering a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Maggie has spoken highly of you." "Please, call me Elon," Elon replied, shaking his hand. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." Father Michael gestured for him to sit on one of the pews. "I'm always happy to talk, especially when it's about questions that matter." Elon sat down, feeling oddly nervous. He had been to many meetings in his life, with billionaires, scientists, world leaders, but this felt different. This wasn't about technology or rockets or business. This was about something deeper, something personal. He wasn't sure how to start, so he just decided to dive in. "Maggie mentioned you might be able to help me with some questions I've been grappling with," Elon began. "Questions about God, about the universe, and what it all means." Father Michael nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "You've come to the right place. Let's start with this. What brought you here? What made you begin to question these things?" Elon thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I've spent my life looking outward, building rockets, pushing technology, trying to answer the big questions of space and science. But somewhere along the way, I started to feel like there was more to life than just what we can measure or calculate. And a few weeks ago, I met a little girl, Emma. She asked me a question about God, and I realized that I didn't have a good answer for her. And now, I'm not sure I even have a good answer for myself." Father Michael smiled gently, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Sometimes, the best questions are the ones that don't have easy answers. You know, Elon, the search for understanding isn't a straight line. We often think we can chart a course for knowledge, but life has a way of throwing us curveballs, questions that make us reconsider everything we thought we knew. Elon nodded slowly. He had always believed that understanding the universe was about breaking things down into pieces, figuring out the mechanics of it all. But now, he was beginning to see that there was a part of the equation that science couldn't address: the human experience. The emotions, the mysteries, the things that couldn't be calculated or measured. "I've spent years trying to solve problems," Elon continued, his voice softer than usual. "But this feels different. I can't solve it the way I solve technical issues. I can't figure it out like I do with SpaceX or Tesla." Father Michael leaned forward, his eyes filled with understanding. "Because the question is not about solving. It's about embracing. The questions you're asking are not technical, they're existential. And sometimes, embracing the uncertainty is where you find your answers." Elon felt a flicker of something, an insight, a realization that resonated deep within him. He had spent his life solving problems, but what if the real solution wasn't about having all the answers? What if it was about accepting that some things could never be fully understood, but still holding on to the wonder of the search? Father Michael continued, his voice steady. "God is not a concept that can be grasped by reason alone. To understand God, one must come at it from the heart. To feel, to experience, to let go of the need for certainty. The mysteries of existence, of creation, are not problems to be solved. They are invitations to be lived. And that, Elon, is the greatest challenge." Elon sat in silence, letting the words wash over him. He hadn't expected to hear something so simple and yet so profound. For so long, he had seen the world in terms of solutions, in terms of progress. But what if, in his drive for progress, he had been missing something far more fundamental? He wasn't sure yet. But for the first time in months, Elon felt a shift within himself. A sense that maybe the journey was more important than the destination. Maybe this was about discovering something not with his mind, but with his heart. After a long pause, Elon spoke again, his voice quieter. "What if I never find the answer?" Father Michael smiled warmly. "Then you'll have lived with the question, and that is a life well lived." In the days following his meeting with Father Michael, Elon found himself reflecting deeply on the conversation they had shared. The priest's words echoed in his mind. The questions are not problems to be solved. They are invitations to be lived. It was a stark contrast to everything he had built his life around. Solving problems, making breakthroughs, finding the next big thing. But there was something about that idea that felt right. Elon had always believed that knowledge could be acquired through effort, through trial and error, through sheer determination. But Father Michael had given him a different lens through which to view the search for truth. Elon spent the next few days in a kind of quiet introspection. His usual pace of life, rapid, filled with meetings, ideas, and deadlines, slowed. He continued to work on SpaceX projects, of course, but his mind wandered more and more to the abstract. He found himself staring up at the night sky, watching the stars with a new kind of curiosity. It was no longer just about the physics of distant galaxies or the propulsion systems that could one day take humanity to Mars. No, now the stars were reminders. Reminders that there were mysteries in the universe that couldn't be explained, but still demanded to be explored. It was one afternoon, while walking alone through a quiet section of the SpaceX campus, that he encountered something unexpected. He had been thinking about the words of Father Michael, about how the search itself was where the answers were hidden, when he stumbled upon one of his engineers, a young woman named Lisa. She was sitting on a bench, staring out at the horizon with a look of deep concentration. Elon had known Lisa for years. She was one of the brightest engineers at SpaceX, with a sharp intellect and a fierce determination to get things right. But today, she seemed different. She was quiet, contemplative, almost as if she were lost in thought. "Everything okay, Lisa?" Elon asked, walking up to her. She turned to him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Oh, hey, Elon. Yeah, everything's fine. Just thinking." "What about?" Elon asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated, as if unsure how to answer. "You know, sometimes I feel like I'm working on all these problems, solving one thing after another. But then, when I step back and look at it all, I wonder, what's the point? We get so caught up in the details, in the systems, in the calculations. But what does it all mean? Does it even matter?" Elon felt a slight surprise at her words. It wasn't often that Lisa expressed doubts. She was usually so driven, so focused. But as he stood there, he realized that her questions mirrored his own, questions he hadn't been able to articulate until recently. "I've been thinking about that too," Elon admitted, sitting down next to her on the bench. "I've spent my life trying to solve big problems, things that will change the world. But sometimes I wonder, what if the answers aren't as important as we think?" Lisa looked at him, clearly intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I met someone recently, a priest, actually, and he said something that's been stuck in my head. The search is more important than the answers. And I've been wondering if that's true. What if the meaning of life isn't found in solving all the problems, but in the way we live with the questions?" Lisa considered this for a moment, her gaze returning to the horizon. "I think I get it. It's like, when we're so focused on the destination, we forget to enjoy the journey. We get so wrapped up in the how and the what that we lose sight of the why." Elon nodded. "Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in the need to know, to have everything figured out. But maybe the real wisdom comes from sitting with the uncertainty, from being okay with not having all the answers." For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. It was a peaceful silence, one that spoke more than words could express. Elon realized, in that quiet space, that he had found something valuable. Not an answer, but an understanding. Perhaps the quest for knowledge was not just about finding solutions, but about how we approach the unknown, with curiosity, openness, and a willingness to embrace mystery. As the conversation tapered off, Lisa turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Elon, I've always admired your drive. But if you ever figure out how to embrace the mystery, let me know. I think that might be the real breakthrough." Elon smiled, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. "I'll keep you posted." The next week, Elon returned to Father Michael's parish. This time, he didn't come with questions or anxieties. Instead, he came seeking something he couldn't yet name, something beyond answers, something beyond the scientific method. The priest had invited him to attend a Sunday Mass, and though Elon had never been particularly religious, he was curious about the experience. He had often thought of religion as a set of doctrines or beliefs, but he had never considered it as an experience, something to be felt, not just understood. Father Michael greeted him at the door with a warm handshake. "I'm glad you're back," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. Elon followed him into the church, which was filled with the soft hum of quiet conversation and the rustling of hymnals. The pews were nearly full, and Elon couldn't help but notice the diversity of the people there. Different ages, different backgrounds, all gathered together under one roof. It was a community, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. They sat near the back, and as the Mass began, Elon allowed himself to simply be there. There was no pressure to think, no expectation to understand. The music, the chanting, the rhythm of the prayers, it all felt like a strange kind of language, one that didn't require words to make sense. It was as if the silence itself was speaking to him, filling the space between the sounds. He closed his eyes for a moment and let himself drift into that silence. In that stillness, something profound began to shift within him. It was a feeling he couldn't name, a sense of connection to something larger than himself, something that didn't need to be dissected or solved. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt at peace with the uncertainty. The answers, if they came, would come in time. But for now, he didn't need them. The search was enough. As the service drew to a close, Father Michael turned to him with a knowing smile. "What do you think?" Elon sat for a moment, absorbing the experience. It was different. "I didn't expect to feel anything like that. It's like I wasn't just observing something from the outside. I was part of it." Father Michael nodded. "Sometimes, it's not about understanding. It's about feeling. The silence, the ritual, it all speaks to something deep within us. The search for meaning is as much about what we experience as what we understand." Elon stood up, feeling a new sense of clarity. He hadn't found all the answers, but he had found something more important, the willingness to embrace the search, to experience it fully, without the need for immediate solutions. And that, he realized, was the first step towards something far greater. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the weeks passed, Elon continued to explore the intersection of science and spirituality, guided by the wisdom he had begun to draw from Father Michael's teachings. Although the pace of his life remained as demanding as ever, meetings, launches, product developments, the questions he had begun asking about the universe, faith, and human existence stayed with him, quietly weaving into the fabric of his daily thoughts. One late evening, while working on SpaceX's Mars colonization plans in his office, Elon received a call from an unexpected source. It was Maggie, his longtime friend and business confidant. He answered the phone, still surrounded by his usual sea of blueprints, models, and digital screens. "Elon," Maggie's voice came through the line, crisp yet warm. "I think it's time we talk." Elon's curiosity piqued. "Talk about what?" "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. I've been thinking about our conversations over the past few months, about your search for answers, and the things you're beginning to question. And I think it's important you hear this from me now. It's not easy to explain, but you deserve to know." Elon felt a brief chill run down his spine. His mind raced. Was this another challenge, another difficult decision he needed to make? His conversations with Father Michael had pushed him toward a different place mentally, and Maggie's words seemed to signal that something was about to shift again. "What is it?" Elon asked, his voice more urgent now. Maggie paused, and Elon could sense the weight of her next words. "I've been talking to someone, a theologian. He's a professor of philosophy, actually. We've had long discussions about the relationship between science and faith, and there's something that might interest you." Elon leaned forward, his attention fully captured. "Go on." "There's a school of thought, Elon, that says science and spirituality don't have to be separate. I know you've been feeling like the two are at odds, but there are some brilliant thinkers who bridge that gap. One of them is Father Michael, who you met, but there's also a philosopher named Dr. Olivia Turner. She's a leading voice in this field. She believes that the mysteries of the universe, science, faith, existence, they all point to something beyond just our perception, something we can't fully grasp, but that we're somehow connected to." Elon let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. This was more than he had expected to hear, but it resonated deeply with him. The merging of the scientific and spiritual was precisely the direction he had been moving toward in his own thinking. And now it seemed like he had found a guide, someone who could help him explore that path. Do you think I should meet her? Elon asked, his voice steady but clearly intrigued. I do, Maggie said, her tone decisive. I think she could give you some perspectives that might change the way you think about all of this. Elon didn't hesitate. Set it up. I'll meet her. A few days later, Elon found himself seated across from Dr. Olivia Turner at a small cafe in downtown Los Angeles. The place was bustling with the hum of conversation, but there was an odd sense of quiet focus around their table, as if the conversation they were about to have was more important than the world outside. Dr. Turner was a striking woman in her mid-40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet confidence. She had a calm demeanor about her, but there was a fire behind her gaze, an intellectual intensity that matched Elon's own. As they exchanged pleasantries, Elon felt an immediate connection, a shared understanding that they were both in search of something greater than their individual accomplishments. Thank you for meeting with me, Elon began, breaking the silence that had settled between them. It's a pleasure, Dr. Turner replied, her voice soothing but firm. Maggie's spoken highly of you. I understand you've been going through a transformation of sorts. Elon nodded. That's one way to put it. I've spent my entire life trying to figure out how the universe works, using science to explain everything. But lately, I've felt like something is missing. It's like there's this other dimension to life that science can't touch. Dr. Turner smiled, a slight knowing curve of her lips. And you're wondering if there's room for both science and something beyond it. Spirituality, perhaps? Elon's eyes widened a little in surprise. Exactly. How did you know? She leaned in slightly, her hands folding gently on the table. It's not uncommon for brilliant minds like yours to reach this point. You've spent your life pushing the boundaries of technology and understanding the laws of nature. But at some point, you begin to wonder about the why, not just the how. The more you discover, the more you realize how much you don't know. And that's a space where both science and spirituality intersect. Elon took in her words, nodding slowly. That's exactly how I've been feeling. But it seems like most people in my world, technology, business, they don't talk about these kinds of questions. It's like if you can't measure it or prove it, it's not worth discussing. Dr. Turner's smile softened. That's the paradox, isn't it? We live in a world that prizes the tangible, the measurable, the visible. But the most important truths, about love, about meaning, about existence, can't be quantified. They're felt, experienced. And that's where spirituality comes in. It allows us to explore the mysteries that science can't answer. Elon listened, deeply absorbed by her words. It was the first time someone had articulated what he had been feeling so clearly. He had been so caught up in his work, in his quest for innovation and progress, that he had overlooked the deeper questions about why all of this mattered. Dr. Turner continued, You see, Elon, there's a growing body of thought among philosophers and scientists who believe that the cosmos itself is more than just a machine. It's a living, interconnected web of existence. It has meaning, even if we can't fully perceive it. And perhaps that meaning is something we feel as much as we know. The experience of awe, of wonder, that's not just an emotional reaction. It's a glimpse into something deeper. Elon felt a sudden spark of understanding. His mind raced as he pieced together fragments of thoughts that had been floating in his head for months. The sense of wonder he had always felt when looking at the stars, was that the same thing that had led so many great thinkers and explorers to believe in something greater than themselves? You're saying that the mysteries we can't explain, those aren't just gaps in our knowledge. They're invitations, Elon said, the realization dawning on him. Dr. Turner's eyes lit up. Exactly. They're invitations to connect with something beyond our individual selves, to experience the universe not just as a series of problems to be solved, but as a wonder to be lived. For the first time in a long while, Elon felt a sense of peace settle over him. It was as if everything he had been searching for, everything he had been missing, was beginning to come into focus. The future of space exploration, the future of humanity's survival on Mars, all of it had always been about survival, progress, and achievement. But now, he understood. It was also about the journey, the exploration of meaning, the recognition of wonder, the acceptance of uncertainty. He looked at Dr. Turner, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you. This, this has been a breakthrough for me." She nodded, her expression gentle. "I'm glad to hear that, Elon. Just remember, sometimes the most profound answers come when we stop searching so hard for them." Elon felt a shift within himself after meeting Dr. Olivia Turner. Her words about spirituality and science weren't just comforting, they were liberating. He had spent his life chasing tangible solutions, breaking down problems into solvable pieces. But Dr. Turner had reminded him that some things couldn't be solved. They had to be lived, felt, experienced. He had started to see the cosmos not just as a series of problems to be cracked, but as something vast and mysterious, a place where meaning wasn't always clear, but always present. It wasn't long before Elon's thoughts began to circle back to the events of that fateful day when Lily had asked him her simple yet profound question. It had been a turning point in his life, the moment when everything he had known, all the knowledge and intellect he had amassed, had been put into perspective. Her question about God, the simple, innocent way she had asked it, had planted a seed of curiosity in him, and that seed was beginning to grow. He hadn't fully processed the emotional weight of her question until now, but it was clear that it was no coincidence. His entire search for meaning, his conversations with Father Michael, his talks with Dr. Turner, and his growing desire to understand something greater than himself. All of it came back to that one moment. It was on an early morning flight to a SpaceX facility that Elon found himself lost in thought again. The plane hummed steadily as it cut through the sky, the vast expanse of blue stretching out beneath him. He gazed out the window, his mind wandering to that question. What is God? It seemed so simple, yet so impossible to answer. It wasn't just a theological query, it was a deeply human one. And it wasn't a question that could be answered by science alone. As the plane soared higher, Elon reflected on his life and the choices he had made. From the early days of Zip2 to the founding of Tesla and SpaceX, he had always been driven by a desire to push the boundaries of what was possible. But lately, he had been sensing something missing. He was chasing bigger goals than ever before, colonizing Mars, saving humanity from climate change, but he was also questioning what lay behind those goals. What drove him to keep going? Was it just ambition? Or was it something deeper, something more personal? In that moment, a strange calm washed over him. He realized that his journey wasn't just about the future of humanity. It was about his own search for meaning, his search for truth. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to embrace the unknown, to sit with the uncertainty, and to trust that the answers, when they came, would come in their own time. Several days later, Elon was back at SpaceX headquarters, sitting in his office late into the evening, staring at the screen before him. His mind kept returning to Lily's question, and for the first time, he felt a sense of peace around it. He realized that there was something profoundly human about seeking answers to questions that didn't have clear, scientific solutions. It wasn't about finding a concrete explanation. It was about the willingness to explore, to question, and to live within the uncertainty. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Maggie. "Maggie, I spoke with Father Michael today. He mentioned something you might want to hear." Elon's heart skipped a beat. Father Michael had been a source of wisdom for him, and Maggie's messages often had a way of nudging him towards something important. "Elon, what did he say?" The message came back quickly. "Maggie, he said there's a spiritual retreat happening in the next few weeks. It's in a remote part of the mountains, away from distractions. He suggested you might want to consider going. It's a place for quiet reflection and deep conversations. A place to ask big questions. I think it might be what you need right now." Elon felt an immediate sense of curiosity rise within him. A retreat. A chance to step away from everything, to clear his mind and reflect. The idea seemed appealing, but there was also a part of him that hesitated. He was always so immersed in the next challenge, in the latest breakthrough. Could he really take the time to slow down? He typed back a quick response. "Elon, let me think about it. I'll get back to you soon." As the evening wore on, Elon sat back in his chair and stared out the window at the city below. He thought about Lily's question once more. What is God? And suddenly, he found himself filled with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For all the challenges he had faced, for all the doubts he had carried, he realized that his search for answers had led him to something he hadn't expected, a deeper connection with the world around him. The mysteries of life were not obstacles to overcome, but invitations to explore. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't need to have all the answers right away. Maybe the search was the answer. A week later, Elon boarded a small plane to the mountains for the retreat. It was a place far removed from the distractions of Silicon Valley, nestled in a remote corner of the world, surrounded by towering peaks and dense forests. The air was crisp and clean, the landscape quiet and still. As the plane descended, Elon's thoughts wandered back to his growing sense of peace with the unknown. The noise of his daily life seemed so far away, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of clarity. Father Michael greeted him at the retreat center, his warm presence a comfort in the cold mountain air. "Welcome, Elon. I'm glad you decided to join us," he said with a smile. Elon nodded, a quiet excitement growing within him. "Thank you for inviting me. I've been searching, and I think this is exactly what I need." Father Michael led him inside to a modest, yet inviting building. There were no high-tech gadgets, no flashy displays, just simple wooden furniture, the soft glow of candles, and the occasional sound of wind rustling through the trees outside. It was a place to disconnect, a place to be still. Over the course of the next few days, Elon participated in quiet reflection and deep conversations with a small group of people. They were philosophers, theologians, and ordinary people from all walks of life who had gathered to ask the same question. What is the meaning of life? On the second evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth and the group gathered for a final conversation, Father Michael turned to Elon. "You've come a long way, Elon. But there's one more question I think you should consider. What does it mean for you to believe?" Elon was taken aback. The question had come out of nowhere, and yet it seemed to cut straight to the heart of his journey. He thought for a long moment before answering. "I've spent my life building things, machines, rockets, electric cars. I've believed in progress, in innovation. But I've never really thought about belief itself. I've always thought belief had to be based on evidence. But I'm beginning to realize that belief doesn't need evidence. Sometimes it's about trusting what you can't see or prove." Father Michael smiled gently. Belief, Elon, is not about seeing what's tangible. It's about trusting the unseen, the invisible threads that connect us all. Sometimes, the greatest discoveries are the ones that can't be measured. Elon sat back, the weight of Father Michael's words settling over him. He had spent his life trying to measure everything. His successes, his failures, his progress. But this was something different. It was about trusting the process, embracing uncertainty, and being okay with not having all the answers. For the first time, Elon felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The search for meaning, for truth, wasn't a race. It was a journey. And perhaps in the end, that was all he needed. Elon spent several more days at the retreat, immersed in quiet reflection and profound discussions. As he sat in the stillness of the mountain cabin, he found that the noise of the outside world, his busy life at SpaceX, the pressure of deadlines, the constant drive for innovation, seemed to fade into the background. For the first time in years, he was able to focus solely on his inner world. The questions that had been quietly nagging at him now seemed to have space to breathe. One evening, Father Michael invited Elon to join him for a solitary walk through the woods. The air was crisp, and the fading light of dusk painted the trees in soft, golden hues. As they walked, the crunch of fallen leaves beneath their boots was the only sound that accompanied their silence. "You're quieter than usual," Father Michael remarked after a while. Elon shrugged, a smile tugging at his lips. "I've been thinking. A lot." "About what?" Father Michael asked, his voice gentle. Elon paused, choosing his words carefully. "About everything. About my life. The companies I've built. SpaceX, Tesla. They've all been about moving forward, about making progress. But recently, I've begun to question whether that's enough. Maybe progress without purpose is just movement for the sake of movement." Father Michael nodded thoughtfully, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. "It's easy to get caught up in the drive to achieve. We live in a culture that celebrates success, that measures everything by its results. But the real question, Elon, is not about what you've accomplished. It's about what you've learned along the way. It's about how you've grown, not just in terms of your work, but in terms of your soul. Elon stopped walking, the weight of Father Michael's words sinking in. He had spent his life obsessed with building and achieving, but now, for the first time, he felt the desire to focus on something else: personal growth, understanding, and connection. There had to be more to life than just the next big breakthrough. What if I've been looking for meaning in the wrong places? Elon asked, his voice quieter now. Father Michael turned to face him, his expression kind but resolute. It's not that you've been looking in the wrong places, Elon. It's that you've been looking too hard for answers that aren't meant to be found with just the mind. Sometimes, meaning comes when we stop trying to force it, when we allow ourselves to simply experience it. Elon exhaled slowly, feeling a sense of release. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to solve every problem, to answer every question. He didn't need to prove himself or his worth. There was something powerful about simply being, about allowing himself to sit in the uncertainty and trust that meaning would come in its own time. As they continued their walk, the air grew colder, and the trees loomed tall around them, bathed in the last light of the setting sun. The world seemed endless in its vastness, but it also felt intimate, as if everything had its place. Elon's thoughts turned to Lily, to the simple, innocent question she had asked him months ago. What is God? Her words had reverberated through his mind ever since that day. He wondered if, in some way, her question had been a catalyst for his own transformation. Lily, with her childlike simplicity, had unlocked something deep within him, a sense of wonder, a curiosity about life's mysteries that hadn't existed before. It had been a question that didn't demand an answer, but invited exploration. Father Michael stopped and turned to him again, breaking his reverie. You know, Elon, sometimes the most profound things come from the most simple questions. You've been asking about the meaning of life, about God. But the answers might not come from searching for grand solutions. They might come from living with the questions. Elon nodded. He could feel a shift inside him. The question Lily had asked was still unresolved, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a doorway to something new, a question to live with, not a puzzle to solve. The following day, Elon decided to take Father Michael's advice and spend some time in solitary reflection. The retreat had been a journey into stillness, and now, with his thoughts clearer than ever, he felt ready to re-enter the world with a new perspective. As he sat on a bench outside, gazing at the sweeping landscape before him, he allowed himself to sink into the present moment. The beauty of the mountains, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, and the distant call of birds. All of it felt more vivid, more real. It was as though his senses had been heightened, as if he were seeing the world for the first time. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. It was a text from Maggie. Maggie, how are you? Elon smiled softly as he typed his reply. Elon, I think I'm starting to get it. I've been looking for answers in the wrong places. Sometimes, you don't need to answer the big questions. You just need to live with them. Maggie's response came quickly. Maggie, that sounds like a breakthrough. I'm glad to hear it. But what about the retreat? Will you be staying longer? Elon thought for a moment. He had planned to leave the next day, but now, he wasn't so sure. The retreat had been exactly what he needed. A space for quiet, for reflection, for release. It had given him the clarity he had been searching for. But he also knew that the real work was just beginning. The question of what is God wasn't something that could be resolved in a few days of meditation. It was a question that would continue to shape his life, just as the journey toward Mars would continue to shape humanity's future. Elon, I think I'll stay a little longer. I'm still learning. A few days later, Elon returned home, a changed man. The time at the retreat had not only offered him peace, but it had also brought him closer to understanding the importance of balance in life. He had always been driven by a sense of urgency, a need to solve the world's problems, to make things happen. But now, he felt the importance of slowing down, of allowing himself the space to ask big questions and live with uncertainty. The retreat had also given him the clarity to see that his life wasn't just about technological advancements or business success. It was about connection, to people, to the world around him, and to something greater than himself. As he sat in his office at SpaceX once more, Elon reflected on how far he had come since that day Lily had asked her question. The journey was far from over. The questions would keep coming, but for the first time, he felt ready to embrace them, not as problems to be solved, but as opportunities to grow. And perhaps, in the process, he would find the answers he had been looking for all along. Back in his office at SpaceX, Elon felt a strange mix of calm and excitement. The mountain retreat had offered him the space to think, reflect, and, most importantly, reconnect. He had spent years chasing the tangible, groundbreaking technology, Mars missions, electric vehicles, but now, something deeper was calling to him. The questions about life, about the meaning of existence, were no longer distractions. They had become the core of his journey. He had learned to live with them, not as problems to be solved, but as mysteries to be experienced. The hum of the SpaceX headquarters filled the room as Elon glanced over the notes on his desk. His mind was still occupied with the lessons he had learned at the retreat. He wasn't sure how to integrate these new realizations into his life, but he knew they would influence the way he approached the future, not just with his work, but with everything else. He typed a quick message to Maggie. Elon, I've been thinking a lot about the journey ahead. It's not just about the mission to Mars anymore. It's about connecting, really connecting, to people, to life, to the world. Maggie's response came a few moments later. Maggie, that's beautiful, Elon. I think you're starting to understand something that many of us struggle with our whole lives. It's not just about achievement. It's about the connections we make along the way. Elon smiled softly at her words. He had always known that relationships mattered. His work had been built on teams, on shared dreams. But now, he understood something deeper. True connection wasn't about working together for a common goal. It was about the willingness to be vulnerable, to ask the big questions, to live authentically. It was about being with people, not just doing things with them. A few days later, Elon attended a high-level meeting with the SpaceX leadership team. The room was filled with engineers, executives, and scientists, all discussing the next phase of the Mars colonization project. The team had made incredible strides. Plans were in place, rockets were being tested, and prototypes for habitats were under construction. But as he listened to the discussion unfold, Elon couldn't help but feel a nagging sense that something was missing. The room was buzzing with the usual excitement and energy, but Elon was far from his usual self. His mind wasn't on the technical details, the design blueprints, or the logistics of the mission. His thoughts were elsewhere. He was listening, of course, but he was also questioning, how would this project affect humanity in the long term? What would it mean for the people who went to Mars? And how would it change the way people viewed life on Earth? When the meeting broke for lunch, Elon found himself lost in thought. The weight of these questions had been growing since his retreat. He was no longer satisfied with just the idea of making history or advancing technology. He wanted to understand the why behind it all. Why send people to Mars? Why fight so hard to save humanity? Was it about survival? Was it about progress? Elon's phone buzzed with a message from Father Michael. The text was simple but profound. Father Michael, remember, the journey is just as important as the destination. The words echoed in Elon's mind, and he felt a sense of clarity wash over him. The message had come at the perfect time. For so long, he had been focused on the destination, on reaching Mars, on achieving the impossible. But perhaps, as Father Michael had said, it was the journey that mattered most. The relationships formed along the way, the growth, the challenges, the moments of doubt. Those were the things that shaped who they would become, both as individuals and as a species. He needed to bring that same sense of connection to SpaceX, to Mars. It couldn't just be about survival. It had to be about something bigger, something that transcended the mission itself. The next day, Elon called a meeting with his top team members, including Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president, and Tom Mueller, the company's vice president of propulsion engineering. He knew the technical side of the mission was in capable hands, but what he needed now was something deeper. He needed them to help him reframe the mission, to look beyond the rockets and the technology and focus on the human aspect of colonizing Mars. Tom, Elon began, his voice calm but purposeful. I've been thinking about the Mars mission, and I believe it's time we shift our focus a bit." Gwyn and Tom exchanged glances. "What do you mean?" Gwyn asked. Elon leaned forward, his hands folded in front of him. "It's not just about getting to Mars. It's about the people who will live there. We need to think about the experience, their relationships, their well-being, how they will connect with one another, with the planet they're leaving behind, and with something greater than themselves." Tom raised an eyebrow. "You're saying we should focus on the human side of the mission? The psychological and emotional aspects?" Elon nodded. "Exactly. The technology is important, but we can't overlook the human element. What is it that makes people want to leave everything behind to start over on another planet? What will the experience of colonizing Mars be like for them emotionally and spiritually? These are the questions I want us to explore." Gwyn nodded thoughtfully. "That's a different perspective. It'll require a whole new way of thinking about this mission." "I know," Elon said, a sense of conviction building in his chest. "But we can't afford to leave that side of things out. The people who go to Mars will be pioneers, yes, but they'll also be part of something much bigger than themselves. We have a responsibility to make sure they understand that and to make sure they're prepared, not just for the technical challenges, but for the emotional and psychological journey ahead." Tom leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled. "I see your point. We'll need to think about everything: how they'll live, how they'll interact, and what their lives will mean beyond just surviving on Mars. We'll need to work with psychologists, philosophers, maybe even spiritual leaders." Elon's eyes brightened. "Exactly. This mission can't just be about technology and science. It has to be about humanity itself. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to start fresh on a new world? And how can we make sure those who go will come back not just with new discoveries, but with a deeper understanding of themselves and their place in the universe?" A few weeks later, Elon found himself in a meeting with experts from various fields: psychologists, philosophers, even spiritual leaders. He had reached out to people who could help shape the human experience on Mars, people who could help answer the questions that had been growing in his mind ever since that day Lily had asked him, "What is God?" He had realized that the Mars mission needed to be about more than just science. It needed to be about creating a new society, one that took into account the emotional, psychological, and even spiritual needs of its inhabitants. As the meeting unfolded, Elon listened intently to each expert's perspective. They discussed everything from mental health and social dynamics to the role of religion and spirituality in the lives of the settlers. There were debates about how to foster community, how to encourage connection in an environment that would be isolated and harsh. One of the spiritual leaders, a Buddhist monk named Tenzin, spoke about the importance of mindfulness and meditation. "On Mars, there will be no distractions," Tenzin said. "It will be a place of isolation, yes, but also a place of deep reflection. The settlers will need to learn how to live in harmony with themselves and with the planet they're on. Meditation will be key to their emotional well-being." Elon leaned forward. "That's exactly the kind of perspective we need. We can't just prepare them with technical skills. We need to prepare them for the spiritual and emotional challenges of such an unprecedented journey." As the meeting ended and the experts filed out, Elon felt a new sense of purpose. The journey to Mars was no longer just about survival or colonization. It was about building a new kind of society. A society that could thrive, not just survive, in the face of overwhelming challenges. It was about asking the big questions, embracing uncertainty, and finding meaning in a world that was, in many ways, still unknown. And as he walked out of the conference room, Elon couldn't help but think of Lily's question once more. What is God? Perhaps the answer, he realized, wasn't a single, definitive thing. It was a question to live with, to explore, to experience. And maybe that was the greatest discovery of all. It had been weeks since Elon had returned from the retreat, and the process of rethinking the Mars mission was slowly taking root. The initial shock of his revelations had begun to settle into something more concrete, a desire to find new meaning, not just in his work, but in the way he viewed the world and the future of humanity. The team at SpaceX had embraced the new direction, albeit cautiously. Some were excited about the idea of integrating the human experience into the mission, but many others, particularly the engineers and scientists, still saw the Mars colonization project primarily through the lens of technology. For them, The goal was clear: build rockets, test habitats, and establish a colony on Mars. The rest, emotional well-being, philosophical reflection, spirituality, seemed secondary, perhaps even unnecessary. But Elon was determined to change that. He knew the technological aspects of the mission would be accomplished. That wasn't the hard part. The real challenge, the one that could redefine humanity's future, was to ensure that those who went to Mars would be prepared for the emotional and spiritual toll it would take on them. He had no intention of sending people into the unknown without fully understanding what they would face on a deeper level. One evening, Elon found himself back in his office, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. He had just come from a meeting with the Mars colonization team, where they had discussed everything from food production to life support systems. Yet, as he reflected on the day's discussions, he couldn't shake the feeling that something crucial was still missing. His thoughts wandered back to the retreat, to Father Michael's words, to the conversations with Maggie, and of course, to Lily, her innocent, profound question about God. What if the search for answers wasn't about finding definitive truths, but about living with the question itself? Elon's thoughts were interrupted by a text from Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president. "Gwynne, Elon, we need to talk. There are concerns within the team about the new direction. They think we're losing focus on the technical side of things." Elon sighed, running a hand through his hair. He had known this was coming. The team was built on precision, engineering, and facts. They were problem solvers, not philosophers. But he had to try. He had to make them understand that this mission, their work, was about more than just survival on Mars. It was about creating a future for humanity that was sustainable on every level, technologically, socially, and spiritually. "Elon, let's meet tomorrow morning. I'll explain why this is important." The next day, Gwynne arrived at his office promptly at 9 a.m. She was, as always, calm and collected, though there was a glint of concern in her eyes. "All right, Elon," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I've talked to some of the key people in the team. They're worried. They think we're drifting too far from our core mission, technology, rockets, and Mars. They don't see the value in focusing on the emotional and psychological sides of things. They're afraid it'll slow us down." Elon leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the surface of his desk. He'd anticipated this, and he knew how to respond. "Gwynne, I get it. But this is not about slowing down. It's about making sure that when we get there, when we establish a colony on Mars, we're not just surviving, we're thriving. If we don't take the emotional and psychological health of the settlers into account, we're setting them up for failure." Gwynne raised an eyebrow. "Failure? Elon, we're talking about Mars. Survival is the priority. The technical challenges are immense. Getting people to Mars, making sure they can live there, those are the stakes." "I know," Elon replied, "but imagine this. A group of people lands on Mars, and they have everything they need to survive: food, water, shelter, technology. But they're isolated. They're cut off from everything and everyone they know. How long do you think it'll take before the cracks start to show? It's not enough to just keep them alive. They need to live." Gwynne's expression softened, though she was still unconvinced. "I understand the argument, Elon, but we're still talking about resources. The budget is tight. We can't afford to divert attention away from the technology side of things. We have to keep focused on the mission." Elon nodded. "I'm not saying we stop focusing on technology. I'm saying we broaden our view. We've been talking about sending people to Mars for years. But what are we sending them for? If it's just to start over, to survive, what have we really accomplished? If this mission is going to matter, we need to ask deeper questions." Gwynne hesitated. "Like what?" "Like why we're doing this," Elon said. "Why do we want to colonize Mars? What's the deeper purpose behind it? It's not just about survival. It's about creating a new society. A society that can learn from the mistakes of the past and build something better, not just in terms of technology, but in terms of how people live with each other, with the planet, and with themselves. We need to build a new kind of world, Gwynne. And to do that, we need to build it from the inside out." Gwynne sat silently for a moment, taking in what he said. She wasn't convinced, but she wasn't dismissive either. She had seen Elon face challenges before, seemingly insurmountable odds. If anyone could make this work, it was him. I'll take this back to the team, Gwyn said at last. But I need you to understand, Elon, this is a big shift. A lot of people don't think this is necessary. I understand, Elon said, his tone resolute, but I believe it is. I'm not asking them to stop doing their jobs. I'm asking them to start asking bigger questions about what it means to be human, about what it means to live, and about what it means to create a future. The days that followed were filled with more conversations, more meetings with the team at SpaceX, and a growing sense of urgency in Elon's mind. He had to make them understand. The Mars mission was more than just a technical achievement. It was an opportunity to rewrite the future of humanity. And that meant embracing the full scope of the human experience, not just the technical and logistical parts. During a team-wide meeting a week later, Elon spoke more directly to the group. He could sense the skepticism, but he also saw a glimmer of curiosity in their eyes. Maybe, just maybe, they were starting to get it. You've all heard me talk about the technology, Elon began, standing at the front of the room. We've built rockets, we've sent probes to distant planets, we've created electric vehicles. But now, we're doing something that's truly unprecedented. We're talking about sending people to Mars, people who will live there, not just survive. And the question I keep coming back to is this. What does it mean for us to do this? What kind of society do we want to create on Mars? He paused, letting his words sink in. I know we're focused on technology. I know the challenges are huge. But if we don't think about the human side of this, the relationships, the mental health, the emotional well-being, we'll be setting ourselves up for failure. We can build the best technology in the world, but if we don't take care of the people using it, none of it matters. He saw the reaction. Some of the engineers nodded, others still looked skeptical. But there was a shift in the room. The walls weren't as high as they had been. Slowly, they were starting to see what he saw. I believe, Elon continued, that the future of humanity depends on this mission. But it's not just about getting to Mars. It's about what we do when we get there. It's about the kind of world we create. And I can't do it alone. We need all of you. We need your brilliance, your passion, your ideas, not just for rockets, but for life, for the future of humanity. As he finished speaking, the room was quiet. But the silence was different now. It was filled with possibility. Elon woke up to a new day with a renewed sense of purpose. The last few weeks had been full of intense meetings, difficult conversations, and a few moments of doubt. But as he stood in the quiet of his home that morning, he felt the weight of his decisions settling into something clear, something undeniable. He wasn't just pushing for the Mars mission anymore. He was pushing for a shift in the way humanity thought about its future. The questions were no longer just about technology or survival. They were about meaning. He stared out the window as the sun began to rise, casting long golden rays across the landscape. What if we could create a new kind of society? He thought, what if we could build something not just for survival, but for the soul of humanity? It wasn't just about Mars anymore. It was about Earth too. It was about how the mission could act as a catalyst for a profound shift in how people approach their lives. The conversations he'd been having with Maggie, Father Michael, and even Lily had all been a part of the journey that had led him here. Now, he saw it clearly. The goal wasn't just to colonize another planet. It was to reimagine life itself. The next day, SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California, was buzzing with activity. Engineers were reviewing the latest developments on the Starship, and the propulsion team was fine-tuning the rocket engines. But today, the real focus wasn't on rockets or space travel. It was on something far more profound. Elon had invited a group of psychologists, philosophers, and experts in human behavior to join the next leadership meeting. He knew it was time to make a critical decision: how to integrate the emotional and psychological aspects of the Mars mission into SpaceX's work. He wanted to ensure that every person who went to Mars would be not just prepared to survive, but to thrive. He wasn't asking for just a few lessons in coping with isolation. He was asking for a transformation in how people thought about life in space, about human resilience, and about community in the most extreme environments. The group assembled in the conference room, and Elon stood before them, his expression thoughtful. Gwyn, Tom, and several top engineers sat around the table, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Thank you all for being here today, Elon began. I know this isn't the typical meeting you're used to, but I've come to realize that the Mars mission isn't just about technology. It's about what happens when we get there, how we live, how we connect, and how we handle the immense psychological and emotional challenges that will come with living on another planet. A murmur rippled through the room. Gwen was the first to speak. Elon, we've talked about the technical aspects of the mission, the rockets, the fuel, the habitats. But now you're asking us to consider something entirely different, something intangible. I am, Elon said, his voice steady, because if we don't consider the intangible, we're missing the heart of this mission. We're not just sending people to Mars. We're sending them on a journey into the unknown, and we need to prepare them, not just with the tools to survive, but with the resilience to thrive. The silence in the room hung heavy. The engineers exchanged looks, clearly uncertain about how to respond. Then, a psychologist named Dr. Karen White, who had been consulting with SpaceX for several months, spoke up. Mr. Musk, I completely understand your concern. The psychological toll of space travel, especially long-term missions, is profound. But we also need to be realistic. We're dealing with limited resources, a small crew, and a focus on survival. The mental health aspects are important, but they can't overshadow the need for technology and mission success. Elon nodded, but his eyes never left Dr. White. I understand the urgency of the technical side, but we're not talking about adding a few mental health check-ins to the schedule. We're talking about creating a system, a culture, where emotional well-being is built into the very fabric of the mission. What we're building is not just a colony. It's a new society, one that has to be founded on principles of connection, compassion, and resilience. And that has to be a priority from day one. Gwen spoke up again, her voice calm but still laced with concern. I hear what you're saying, Elon, but this is a shift. A fundamental shift in how we approach this entire project. We're talking about human nature, something unpredictable, difficult to quantify. I know, Elon said, his voice unwavering, but that's why this matters. Because when we get to Mars, we won't just be looking at rocks and red dust. We'll be looking at ourselves. And if we don't build a foundation that supports our emotional and psychological well-being, then we risk losing something far greater than the mission itself. There was a long pause. The room was heavy with thought. The engineers were processing what Elon had just said, and for the first time, some of them were beginning to see the bigger picture. Dr. White broke the silence. What you're proposing, Elon, is a new kind of preparation. One that includes not just the physical and technical training, but the emotional and psychological tools that the settlers will need. We'll need to design support systems, establish regular communication routines, and even create a foundation for philosophical and spiritual exploration. Exactly, Elon said, his eyes brightening. That's exactly what I'm asking for. We need to prepare people for the isolation, the uncertainty, the long stretches of silence between Earth and Mars. We need to teach them how to connect, both with each other and with the vastness of space. And that means addressing the existential questions, the questions that have been on my mind ever since that day Lily asked me about God. A few moments passed before anyone spoke. The weight of what Elon was suggesting was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just a Mars mission anymore. It was an opportunity to rethink everything, the way humanity approached exploration, survival, and even the meaning of life. I think I see what you mean, Tom Mueller said finally. It's not just about surviving on Mars. It's about creating a new kind of life, a life that can grow, adapt, and thrive in ways we've never considered before. We'll need to build not just technology, but a culture, and that will require all of us, psychologists, engineers, philosophers, even spiritual leaders. Elon smiled, grateful for Tom's insight. Yes, exactly. It's about building a new foundation. A foundation that doesn't just look outward to the stars, but inward to the human spirit. The conversation continued for hours, with the team discussing everything from the role of daily routines in mental health to the importance of philosophical study for settlers on Mars. They talked about how to create a balanced environment, one that would nurture the emotional and psychological health of the crew while maintaining the focus on mission success. They debated how to integrate regular communication with Earth without overwhelming the settlers with homesickness, how to provide opportunities for reflection and mindfulness, and even how to address the spiritual needs of people who might feel deeply isolated on a new world. At the end of the meeting, Elon felt a sense of accomplishment. The room had been filled with skepticism at first, but now there was a sense of possibility. His vision was beginning to take shape, not just as an idea but as a plan, one that was challenging the very way they thought about space travel. As he walked out of the conference room, he felt an unfamiliar but powerful sense of peace. This mission was no longer just about technology or rockets. It was about humanity, about connection, about the search for meaning. He looked down at his phone and saw a new message from Maggie. Maggie, Elon, I've been thinking about what you said the other day. The deeper questions, the ones we don't always have answers for. Maybe we can't solve them, but we can live with them. Maybe that's the key, to live with the questions, to embrace the unknown. Elon's heart skipped a beat. He thought back to that day on the mountaintop when Lily had asked him about God. He didn't have all the answers, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the real answer lay in the journey itself, the questions, the connections, the discoveries, the growth. It was all part of the story, and as long as he could keep moving forward, keep asking the big questions, then he knew he was on the right path. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of planning and preparation. The discussions about the psychological and philosophical aspects of the Mars mission continued to gain momentum, but Elon knew that the real challenge wasn't just convincing his team or SpaceX's leadership. It was ensuring that this new vision would truly take root in the culture of the company, in the work they did every day. While the technical aspects of the Mars mission were progressing, with test flights and simulations moving forward at full speed, Elon began to notice subtle shifts in the way people around him were thinking. His engineers were no longer just checking off boxes or solving problems for the sake of solving them. There was a new energy in the air, a sense of purpose that went beyond the confines of their work. They were becoming more thoughtful, more reflective. It was as if the mission had expanded into something deeper, something that was as much about the human condition as it was about technology. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Elon found himself walking through the SpaceX campus, his mind swirling with thoughts about the future. He stopped by the engineering department, where a few of his top engineers were gathered around a table, discussing the latest progress on the Starship prototype. "Hey, Elon," one of them, Mike, called out as he walked by. "Got a minute?" "Sure," Elon replied, stepping into the room. "What's going on?" Mike gestured to the whiteboard where calculations and diagrams covered the surface. "We're working through some propulsion optimization, but we've also been talking about the long-term goals, how we'll handle communication between Mars and Earth, especially considering the time delays. That's going to be a real issue when we have settlers out there. We're thinking about how we can keep the human element intact while making sure the technical side runs smoothly." Elon nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good point. Communication won't just be about data or technology. It'll be about emotional connection too. The settlers are going to need to stay connected to the people back on Earth, to their families, friends, and loved ones. It's more than just sending a message. It's about creating a bridge." Another engineer, Sarah, looked up from her laptop. "We've been thinking about that too. Maybe regular video calls, but also something more personal. Not just updates or reports, but something that keeps people's spirits up, like stories or messages from Earth that are more about connection and less about business." Elon smiled. It was a small moment, but it was one that showed how the team was beginning to internalize the mission's deeper goals. The work was no longer just about technology. It was about people. "I like that idea. Maybe even stories that come from people all over the world. Different perspectives, different cultures, different experiences. Mars is going to be a global endeavor, and the settlers need to feel like they're still part of something bigger than just their mission." Mike and Sarah exchanged looks, clearly considering the idea. "We'll start looking into that," Sarah said. "Something to keep the crew inspired and reminded that they're part of something truly groundbreaking." Elon left the room with a sense of satisfaction. He wasn't just thinking about rockets anymore. He was thinking about humanity, about the ways they could shape the future of life on Mars in a way that was truly holistic. Later that evening, after he had returned home, Elon sat in his study, reflecting on the day's conversations. His phone buzzed with a message from Maggie. He had been communicating with her more frequently in the past few weeks, and every conversation seemed to leave him feeling more grounded, more centered. Maggie, I've been thinking a lot about what you said earlier. The idea of living with the questions. I agree. Maybe the most important thing we can do is learn to live with uncertainty, to embrace the unknown. It's scary, but it's also freeing. We don't have to have all the answers. We just have to keep moving forward. Elon typed a quick reply. Elon, I've been thinking about that too. Maybe we don't need all the answers, but we do need to ask the right questions. And we need to create a space where those questions can be explored, both in space and on Earth. The message felt like a small affirmation, one that reminded him that his own journey was still unfolding, and that the questions he was facing weren't just about space or technology, but about life itself. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the window, watching the stars in the sky. The thought of those far-off worlds, Mars in particular, seemed closer now, but the path ahead was still uncertain. The deeper questions would never fully be answered. And yet, in that uncertainty, Elon felt something stirring inside him. A purpose that was bigger than any one mission. A purpose that was about humanity's potential, about connection, and about the possibility of a future that wasn't bound by the limitations of the past. He could see it now. The future of Mars, not just as a colony, but as a new society. A place where people would learn to live together, to grow together, to thrive despite the vast isolation of space. But it wasn't just about surviving on Mars. It was about creating something meaningful in the process. It was about creating a new way of living. The next morning, Elon met with his team once again. This time, the conversation was different. There was a new energy in the room, one that spoke to a deeper understanding of the mission. People weren't just talking about how to get to Mars. They were talking about what would happen once they got there. The conversations were no longer just about technology. They were about culture, about human connection, about the intangible elements that would make life on Mars sustainable for the long term. Elon began to speak, his voice calm but filled with conviction. We've been focused on the mechanics, on the rockets and the technology, and that's important. But now it's time to focus on something just as important, the human experience. When we get to Mars, we'll be establishing the first human society beyond Earth. And that society has to be built on more than just survival. It has to be built on hope, connection, and meaning. He paused, looking around the room, meeting the eyes of each person there. This isn't just a mission to another planet. It's a chance to redefine what it means to be human, to explore not just the stars but the depths of our own hearts and minds. We have a responsibility to ensure that the people who go to Mars are ready for everything, both the technical challenges and the emotional, psychological, and spiritual ones. There was a quiet in the room, a moment of reflection. The engineers, the scientists, the philosophers, they were all beginning to see the depth of what Elon was asking. This wasn't just a mission to Mars. This was a journey to the unknown, not just of space, but of the soul. Later that day, Elon sat down with Gwyn and a few of the other senior leaders to discuss the next steps. They had made great strides in integrating the human element into the mission, but there was still much work to be done. Gwyn, ever practical, was the first to speak. Elon, I've been thinking about what you said. The emotional, philosophical, and spiritual aspects. It's a bold vision. But how do we actually integrate it into the mission planning? How do we make this a reality? Elon leaned forward, his eyes sharp. It's not just about adding programs or routines. It's about creating a new culture. We need to start with the selection process. We need to choose people who aren't just technically capable, but who can also handle the psychological and emotional challenges of living on Mars. People who are resilient, who are open to exploring the deeper aspects of life. And we need to train them, not just to be astronauts, but to be leaders in this new society. Gwyn nodded, her expression thoughtful. It's going to be a challenge, but I see where you're coming from. If we can build the right foundation for the settlers, we can ensure their success, not just on Mars, but in the future of humanity. Elon smiled. Exactly. We're not just building a mission to Mars. We're building the foundation for a new world. The weeks following Elon's meeting with the senior leadership team felt like a turning point. The vision he had shared, of a Mars mission that not only survived but thrived, not only conquered space but also redefined the human experience, began to take shape in ways that felt both thrilling and daunting. At SpaceX, the engineers and mission planners began to take a more holistic approach to their work. Discussions about the technical aspects of the mission, rockets, habitats, life support systems, were now regularly paired with conversations about mental health, emotional resilience, and the long-term psychological impacts of living on another planet. It wasn't just about sending people to Mars. It was about ensuring they could build a life once they got there, a life filled with purpose, connection, and meaning. Elon felt a sense of pride as he watched this transformation unfold. It wasn't easy to convince a team of top-tier engineers and scientists to look beyond the hard facts and embrace the intangible elements of the mission. But one by one, his colleagues were beginning to see the bigger picture. One afternoon, as Elon was reviewing reports from the latest tests, he received a message from Father Michael. It had been some time since they last spoke, and Elon was eager to hear from him again. They had formed an unexpected but meaningful bond, one that had helped Elon see the Mars mission through a different lens, not just as a technological achievement, but as a spiritual and existential journey. Father Michael, Elon, I've been reflecting on our conversations about the human spirit. You've mentioned the idea of building a society on Mars, but I wonder if we've truly considered the deeper needs of the settlers. The psychological challenges of isolation are vast, but so are the spiritual questions. What will they believe in? What will they hold on to in the dark moments when hope feels distant? I've been thinking about how we can integrate not just mental health support, but a spiritual foundation for this new community. Let's discuss soon. Elon sat back, his mind racing. Father Michael was right, of course. They had talked about emotional well-being, but the spiritual aspect was something that hadn't been fully addressed. What would the settlers believe in, so far from Earth? How could they find meaning when they were so far removed from everything they knew? He quickly typed a response. Elon, Father, I've been thinking a lot about this too. The questions you raise are essential. It's not just about surviving on Mars. It's about finding a deeper purpose. Let's discuss when you have time. I think this could be a critical part of our mission. Elon leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. It wasn't just about engineering or creating a habitable environment anymore. It was about ensuring that those who went to Mars didn't just survive, they lived meaningful lives, lives that mattered, lives that transcended the challenges they would face. The following week, Elon and Father Michael sat down for a video call. The connection was a little slow, given the distance, but they made do. Elon found himself grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation. It was, after all, about something that transcended technology. Father Michael's face appeared on the screen, his kind eyes framed by the soft lighting of his office. Elon, it's good to hear from you, he said warmly. It's been too long, Elon replied with a smile. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about the settlers on Mars and what they'll need. Not just the tools to survive, but the foundation to live meaningful lives. You're right, this mission can't just be about engineering. It has to be about the human spirit. Father Michael nodded thoughtfully. Yes. And that's where the question of faith and belief becomes so important. It's not necessarily about any one religion or philosophy. It's about the capacity of the human soul to find meaning, to hold on to hope, even in the darkest of times. Elon leaned forward, his expression intense. What if we could provide them with the tools to explore that meaning? To have regular spaces, maybe even a philosophy or spirituality corner in the habitat, where they could reflect, ask questions, seek answers, not just about survival, but about what it means to be human, about why they're there. Father Michael's eyes brightened. That's a wonderful idea, Elon. Creating a space for reflection, for the deep questions that naturally arise in such a profound journey. It could be a way for them to stay connected to their own humanity. Elon's mind was spinning with ideas. We could integrate philosophy and religion into their training, giving them a broad understanding of different worldviews. And once they're on Mars, we could create a system where they can explore their questions, whether through communal discussions, written reflections, or personal contemplation. This isn't just about survival. It's about thriving in the face of the unknown. Father Michael smiled. Exactly. The unknown is where the soul thrives, in many ways. And Mars, in its vast emptiness, will challenge them in ways they can't even anticipate. They'll need something to hold on to, a sense of purpose beyond the mission itself. Elon nodded. That's the key. We need to help them find that purpose. And in doing so, we help all of humanity find a new way of looking at life, not just on Mars, but here on Earth too. Because the questions we face in space, the challenges of isolation and meaning, are the same questions that we face on Earth every day. That evening, Elon sat down to reflect. The meeting with Father Michael had shifted something inside him. It was clear now. The Mars mission wasn't just about creating a new society on a new planet. It was about reimagining humanity's future. It was about giving people the tools not only to survive in space, but to thrive emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually. He realized that this wasn't just about the people who would go to Mars. It was about all of humanity. The ripple effect of this mission, if successful, could change the way people thought about life, about space, and about each other. It was bigger than just a technological feat. It was about the deeper questions that had haunted humanity for millennia. What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? What is our place in the universe? Elon turned his gaze to the stars once again, but this time, he didn't see them as distant objects of exploration. He saw them as symbols. Symbols of the potential for human growth, for discovery, and for meaning. Mars, the moon, the stars, they were no longer just places to reach. They were invitations to explore the unknowns of the human spirit. The next morning, Elon called a meeting with his senior leadership team. He had a new idea, one that he wanted to discuss and refine. "I've been thinking a lot about our mission," he began. "We've talked about Mars as a technological challenge, as a survival mission. But it's more than that. I believe that if we're going to succeed on Mars, we need to prepare people not just with the skills to survive, but with the mental, emotional, and spiritual resilience to thrive." There was a pause, and then Gwen spoke up. "Elon, I understand the emotional and psychological aspects, but the spiritual side of things, that's a new angle. How do we integrate something like that into the mission?" Elon smiled. "It starts with education. We need to prepare the settlers for the deeper challenges they'll face. We'll provide them with tools for reflection, for philosophical exploration, and for spiritual growth. This mission isn't just about getting to Mars. It's about transforming what it means to be human." The team fell into deep thought. It was clear to them now that Elon's vision wasn't just about Mars. It was about humanity itself. As the meeting wrapped up, Elon felt a surge of inspiration. This was the future he had always dreamed of, but it was more than just a dream now. It was a reality they were beginning to build, a reality where people didn't just survive the unknowns of space. They embraced them, grew from them, and found new meaning in the process. He knew the journey ahead would be long, difficult, and filled with uncertainty. But that was the point. The greatest discoveries were always born from the unknown. And Elon Musk, in his own way, was leading humanity into that unknown, into the vastness of space, but also into the vastness of the human soul. As the months passed, the Mars mission gained momentum. While technical challenges persisted, a new, more profound layer of complexity began to emerge. The SpaceX team had embraced Elon's vision of a deeper, more meaningful exploration, one that went beyond rockets and habitats and into the very heart of what it meant to be human. Elon's focus on emotional resilience, spiritual reflection, and human connection continued to shape the mission's foundation. Yet, as much as he had shared his ideas with his team, he knew there was one critical part of the puzzle left to address: the settlers themselves. Who were these people that would first step foot on Mars? What were they really like? And perhaps most importantly, what would they need, beyond the technical skills, to face the unimaginable challenges of life on the red planet? To answer these questions, Elon turned to the one thing he had always believed was essential to the success of any long-term venture: the right people. It was a bright afternoon when Elon entered the SpaceX training facility to meet with the team responsible for selecting the first group of Mars settlers. The room buzzed with activity as engineers and psychologists worked side by side, preparing simulations and psychological profiles. The selection process had already begun in earnest, but Elon wanted to ensure that the most important criteria weren't being overlooked. He sat at the head of the table, flanked by Gwen, Sarah, and a few of the lead psychologists and human resources experts. "We need more than just technically capable astronauts," Elon said, his voice steady but urgent. "We need people who can face the unknown with courage, but also with compassion. People who can withstand isolation and hardship, but who will also thrive in a community. We need settlers who aren't just survivors. They're builders, thinkers, leaders. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. We've been running psychological evaluations, and we've selected candidates who have shown resilience in extreme environments. Some have backgrounds in deep-sea diving, Arctic exploration, or long-term space missions. They're physically fit, adaptable, and highly intelligent. Elon held up a hand. That's good, but resilience is only part of the picture. What about their ability to stay connected to others? To keep a sense of purpose when they're far from everything they've ever known? What's going to keep them human when the isolation becomes overwhelming? We need to make sure they have the capacity to explore their own questions, to find meaning in the mission, and to inspire others to do the same. Gwen spoke next. We've been working with a group of philosophers and theologians to help us understand the deeper aspects of this. I think one thing we've missed is integrating this into the selection process more explicitly. We're looking at things like emotional intelligence, empathy, and philosophical openness in addition to physical fitness. Elon's gaze sharpened. Good. We need to see how these candidates handle not just the technical side of things, but the emotional, spiritual, and intellectual side. The deeper work of living on Mars, where every day will be a challenge to your humanity, is as important as the rockets themselves. The group fell into a contemplative silence, each person processing the magnitude of what Elon was proposing. He wasn't just thinking about the first steps on Mars. He was thinking about creating a new society, one built on the foundation of human connection, purpose, and shared meaning. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elon found himself walking alone through the SpaceX campus, the cool night air brushing against his face. His mind was full, a swirl of ideas and questions. He'd spoken with Father Michael again that afternoon, and their conversations about faith, meaning, and human growth had only deepened his conviction that the Mars mission was about more than just technology. It was about creating a new future, a future where humanity could thrive in space, but also evolve on Earth. In his quiet reflection, Elon thought about the settlers. He thought about the first people who would stand on Mars, feeling the alien dust beneath their feet, looking out over an endless red horizon. They would be pioneers in every sense of the word, but they would also be carrying the weight of something far greater, the future of humanity. The culture they would create on Mars would echo back to Earth, influencing the way people thought about themselves, their place in the world, and their potential. But how would they stay connected to Earth? How could the settlers continue to feel part of the human story even as they ventured farther into space? This was the question that had been haunting Elon for weeks. Mars would be an isolated, difficult place, and the settlers would need to feel a sense of belonging, not just to each other, but to the broader world they had left behind. The next morning, Elon called a meeting with the team to discuss a new idea. "I've been thinking about how to keep the settlers connected to Earth in a deeper way," he began. "We've already discussed using technology for communication, but what if we could do something more? Something that isn't just about sending messages, but about sharing the human experience across vast distances?" The room was quiet as people looked at him, waiting for his next words. What if we could set up a cultural exchange program where people from Earth could send more than just messages? What if they could send stories, art, music, things that reflect the essence of what it means to be human? The settlers would receive these items, and in turn, they could share their own experiences. We could create a living archive of human life, one that grows as the Mars mission progresses. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You mean something like a cultural time capsule? A way for the settlers to stay in touch with the diversity of human experience, not just facts and data?" "Exactly," Elon replied. "Think about it. If the settlers are isolated on Mars for years, they'll need something to remind them that they're part of a larger human story, something that will help them stay grounded in their shared humanity." Gwen leaned forward. "It's a beautiful idea, but how do we make it a reality? How do we ensure that the cultural exchange goes beyond just messages, that it's something that brings the people of Earth and Mars together, not just through words, but through shared experiences?" Elon smiled. "We'll start small. We'll send a few messages, a few pieces of art, some letters, and we'll see how it evolves. But this could become something much bigger, an ongoing exchange that transcends the boundaries of space and time." a way for humanity to stay connected, even when it feels like the distances are insurmountable. As the meeting wrapped up, Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had always believed that technology could change the world. But now, more than ever, he was beginning to see that the future of humanity wasn't just about engineering. It was about creating connections across space, across time, and across the very fabric of the human experience. He couldn't help but think back to his conversation with Lily, the little girl who had first sparked this journey. She had asked him a simple, profound question about God, and in doing so, she had set him on a path that had led to this moment. What if the mission to Mars was about more than just reaching a distant planet? What if it was about creating a bridge between Earth and the stars? A bridge that would not only carry people, but ideas, cultures, and hopes for the future. In that moment, Elon knew that the Mars mission was no longer just about space exploration. It was about the deeper journey of humanity itself, a journey that began with a single question, a single spark, and a single child. As the Mars mission moved into its final stages of preparation, the world's eyes were increasingly fixed on SpaceX. The excitement, the fear, the wonder, it was all palpable. But amid the frenzy of media attention and technological advancements, Elon Musk found himself becoming more introspective. There was still so much work to be done, but something had shifted. The technical hurdles no longer felt like the biggest obstacles. The true challenge was understanding how the settlers would not only survive, but thrive. As the mission neared its launch window, the psychological and emotional training programs for the first settlers intensified. SpaceX had assembled an unprecedented team of psychologists, philosophers, artists, and spiritual leaders, each one tasked with addressing a different facet of the human experience on Mars. The settlers would need to be prepared not just for the technical demands of living on another planet, but for the soul-stretching challenge of living in isolation, far from everything they had ever known. Elon sat in the control room, staring at the blinking lights on the screens, his mind still on the settlers. He thought about how they would be the first pioneers in human history to forge a life on another planet. People who would face unimaginable challenges, but also the opportunity to create something entirely new. They would build a society from the ground up, not just with technology, but with values and philosophies that would shape the future of humanity. He picked up his phone and sent a quick message to Father Michael. How do we make sure they understand the depth of what they're doing? That it's not just about building a new civilization on Mars, but about asking the big questions about why they're there? The response came almost immediately. Father Michael, Elon, it's not easy. People can easily get lost in the excitement of the unknown, in the promise of something new and groundbreaking. But the truth is, it's not just about the frontier of space. It's about the frontier of the human soul. Mars offers us an opportunity to confront our deepest fears, our biggest hopes, our most profound questions. And that's where the true mission lies, not just in the stars, but in ourselves. Elon read the message and felt a wave of clarity wash over him. Father Michael was right. The settlers would face trials and sacrifices, yes, but they would also be given a chance to discover what it truly means to be human. And as they made their way into the vast emptiness of space, they would find that the questions they grappled with there were the same ones that humanity had struggled with for millennia. Later that evening, Elon found himself in a video call with the first group of Mars settlers, each one chosen not just for their technical expertise, but for their emotional and philosophical resilience. The candidates were nervous, excited, and in some cases, unsure of what they had signed up for. Elon could see the mix of awe and fear in their eyes as they prepared to embark on the journey of a lifetime. Everyone has their own reasons for wanting to go to Mars, Elon began, his voice calm but resolute. Some of you may have signed up because of the adventure, because of the unknown. Others may have done it because you believe in the bigger picture, the idea of creating a new world. But the truth is, this mission is about more than just exploration or settlement. It's about something deeper. It's about the future of humanity. And that means facing not only the technical challenges, but the emotional and spiritual ones as well. There was a pause, and then one of the settlers, a young woman named Amanda, spoke up. How do we deal with the isolation, Elon? The loneliness? I mean, we're going to be on Mars for years. We won't see our families. We won't be able to just pick up the phone and talk to anyone. How do we stay grounded? Elon took a deep breath. It's a good question. The isolation will be one of the hardest parts, and you'll need to find ways to stay connected, not just to each other, but to yourselves. You'll need to build a new kind of community, one that goes beyond physical presence. We've designed the habitat to be a place where you'll have the space you need, but also a place where you can explore the deeper questions of life. We're working on ways to keep you connected to Earth through letters, art, music, and philosophy. And we've also designed a program for spiritual reflection to help you understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you can find meaning even in the darkest moments. There was a murmur of approval from the group, though they all knew it would take more than words to prepare them for the challenges ahead. Another settler, a man named Marcus, asked, "What if we start to lose hope? What if we can't keep it together? The mission is huge, and we'll be so far away from Earth. How do we keep going when it feels like we're too far from everything we know?" Elon paused, thinking. There will be tough moments. There will be times when you'll question everything, when the weight of it all feels unbearable. But in those moments, remember this. You're not just there for yourselves. You're there for everyone. You're not just pioneers in space. You're pioneers for humanity. Every day you spend on Mars, every decision you make, every relationship you build, you're laying the groundwork for the future of our species. And that's a responsibility that transcends the mission itself. He looked at each of them, his gaze firm but compassionate. You're not alone in this. You'll have each other. You'll have your training. You'll have your reflections. And when it gets tough, you'll have your purpose. You're not just building a colony on Mars. You're showing all of humanity what's possible when we face the unknown. Not just with our skills, but with our hearts, our minds, and our souls. The settlers sat in silence for a moment, each of them processing the enormity of what Elon had just said. They were no longer just explorers. They were part of something much larger. They were carrying the hopes and dreams of an entire planet with them, and that weight was both humbling and empowering. Amanda, the young woman who had spoken earlier, spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "I think we're ready. I think we're ready to take that first step, not just for us, but for everyone." Elon smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. "You are, and the world will be watching. But remember this, you're not just carrying humanity with you, you're carrying each other. And that's what will keep you going." As the call ended and Elon walked away from the conference room, he felt the weight of the mission settling on his shoulders once again. It was a weight he had accepted long ago, but it felt heavier now, more profound. The settlers were ready, yes, but the real work, the work that would shape the future of humanity, was just beginning. Days later, the final preparations were in place. The rocket was ready. The crew was set. The world was holding its breath. The Mars mission was about to launch. That night, Elon stood alone on the balcony of his home, staring up at the stars. He thought about Lily, the little girl who had first asked him about God, and how her simple question had set this entire journey into motion. He thought about the settlers, the pioneers who were about to leave everything they knew behind in the pursuit of something greater. He thought about the bridge between Earth and Mars, and how, through this mission, humanity was stepping into a new era. As he looked up at the night sky, he whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." The morning of the launch was crisp and still. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath as the first crew of settlers prepared to board the SpaceX Starship that would take them on the journey to Mars. This wasn't just a historical moment. It was the culmination of years of dreams, failures, perseverance, and hope. As the spacecraft stood on the launch pad, gleaming in the early sunlight, it wasn't just a testament to human ingenuity, but to human spirit. Elon stood in front of the massive windows of the control center, staring at the rocket. His heart raced, but there was an underlying calmness, a sense of inevitability, as if this was the way it was always meant to be. The mission was no longer just a project or a technological marvel. It was a part of him. It was his vision for humanity's future, one where we weren't just inhabitants of Earth but of the stars. Around him, the team was tense. Technicians scurried from console to console, ensuring that everything was ready. Gwen and Sarah were by his side, their faces a mix of excitement and anxiety. "Elon, everything's in place." Gwyn said, her voice firm but warm. The rocket is ready for launch. The crew is prepped and mentally prepared. We've done everything we can. This is it. Elon nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the horizon. His mind was somewhere between the present and the unknown. The settlers were about to embark on a journey unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. They were about to become the first people to leave Earth for another world. But it was more than that. They weren't just leaving behind their families and their homes. They were stepping into a new age of human possibility. They were going to Mars to build a new future, and that future would shape the lives of generations to come. How are they holding up? Elon asked, his voice low. Sarah, always the optimist, smiled faintly. They're nervous, but they're excited. This crew was chosen because they can handle uncertainty. They've trained for years for this moment. Gwyn added, they've heard your words. They know what's at stake. They're ready, Elon. I can feel it. Meanwhile, in the crew quarters, the settlers were gathered in the small, tightly packed lounge area, waiting for the final call. They had been through countless drills and simulations, but nothing could truly prepare them for what was to come. Amanda, Marcus, Lily, and the others stood together, each lost in their own thoughts, each facing the enormity of what they were about to do. Lily, the young girl who had first sparked Elon's reflection, was now part of the crew, her presence as symbolic as it was practical. She wasn't just the youngest. She was the embodiment of the mission's deepest message, that humanity's future was in the hands of those willing to reach for something bigger, something beyond the horizon of their understanding. As the countdown began, the crew took their final moments of quiet reflection. The mission was no longer a concept, a dream, or a hope. It was real. Mars was within their reach, and each of them was about to make history. But they also understood the weight of the task ahead. They were not just pioneers on a new planet. They were the first to step into a future that demanded they learn not just how to live in space, but how to live with each other, with their purpose, and with the unknown. 5 minutes to launch, came the call from the control room. Elon took a deep breath, his mind flashing through the countless conversations and plans that had brought them here. The dream had always been to reach the stars, but now, as the countdown ticked down, the real meaning of the journey was becoming clear. This wasn't just about exploration. It was about transformation, both for Mars and for humanity itself. In the crew quarters, Lily turned to Marcus, her expression calm despite the tension in the air. "Do you think we'll be okay?" she asked softly. Marcus, ever the quiet leader, looked at her with a reassuring smile. "We've trained for this. We've prepared for everything. We'll be okay. We're going to build something together. Not just on Mars, but for all of humanity." Lily smiled back, her small face reflecting a maturity that belied her age. "I think we're going to make it. I think we're going to change everything." As the final seconds of the countdown passed, Elon turned to Gwyn and Sarah. "This is it," he said. "We've built something bigger than just a mission. We've built a legacy. This is the moment when humanity becomes a multi-planetary species. Do you think we've prepared them for everything?" Gwyn asked, a tinge of doubt in her voice. Elon met her gaze with unwavering certainty. "No one can truly be prepared for everything, but they'll figure it out. Together, we've given them the tools, the training, and the philosophy. Now, they make it real." The countdown reached 0. The ground trembled beneath them as the rocket's engines roared to life, sending a trail of flame and smoke into the sky. The sound was deafening, and for a split second, it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. The rocket rose slowly at first, and then with increasing speed, as the crew made their final departure from Earth. In that moment, as the spaceship disappeared into the sky, Elon allowed himself a brief moment of quiet. For all the years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the countless sacrifices, it had led to this. They were on their way. They had taken the first step. But as the rocket soared upward, Elon couldn't help but feel that this was more than just a physical journey. This was the beginning of something far greater, a new chapter in humanity's story, one that stretched not just across space, but deep into the heart of what it meant to be human. The settlers were on their way to Mars, yes, but they were also on their way to something more, a future where humanity's potential was limitless, where the pursuit of knowledge, understanding, and connection would transcend the boundaries of Earth and extend into the stars. Elon took one last look at the sky, the fading trail of the rocket becoming a distant speck. He whispered softly, as if speaking to the vast emptiness ahead, "This is just the beginning." Months passed, and Earth watched as the settlers adapted to their new life on Mars. With each passing day, they grew stronger, more resilient, and more connected. They built their first habitats, cultivated the first crops, and sent the first messages back home. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when doubt crept in, but they pressed forward because they knew what was at stake. The cultural exchange program that Elon had envisioned took root, and messages from Earth, stories, songs, and letters, arrived regularly, keeping the settlers connected to their home planet in ways that were both heartening and profound. Through art, through music, through letters filled with wisdom and hope, the settlers realized that they were not just building a colony. They were creating a bridge between two worlds, a bridge that would last for generations. And in the years that followed, more missions were launched, more people were sent, and humanity's presence on Mars grew. But it was the first step, the first group of settlers, that would forever be remembered as the moment when humanity truly began to reach for the stars. It was a journey that started with a single question: what if? And it would continue, because humanity had learned that the real journey was not just about reaching new planets. It was about discovering who we could become when we dared to dream beyond what we knew. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?